Gon Leo was overly cheerful, saying that he hadn't been in such a space for a long time, which made Sai Min's abilities even more interesting, as if he didn't understand that something much more serious awaited him. Sai Min explained that no one could use their skills in this space, and confidently informed Gon Leo that when he lost, his skull would be immediately torn off. The blond man seemed to have already gotten used to not feeling solid ground under his feet, and he crossed his legs, hanging in the air, talking to his opponent with a provocative expression, saying that Sai Min was surprising him more and more, which was pleasant, at least for General Yungo, but someone else in his place would not have been particularly happy. But he did not fall for the sweet flattery and simply summed up that Gon Leo's life was now coming to an end, with very little time left. Gon Leo did not take this to heart at all. It only made him happy, but most likely these were just Sai Min's dreams, which would probably not come true. The owner of this place interrupted the guys, explaining that there would be only 38 numbers, 2 colors, and they had to choose one of the two. The god of death would throw a ball, then spin the roulette wheel, and the winner would be the color on which the ball landed. The winner would leave this place alive and unharmed, but the loser would leave his head here, and then he showed that he already had many of them. And Sai Min did not wait to agree on who would choose which color and immediately said that he would choose black, hastily snatching this option from the hands of his enemy, because it was his lucky color, or so he believed. And of course, Gon Leo had no choice but to choose red, as the god of death had informed him, and he accepted this with a smile and asked to start quickly. And then Sai Min raised his hand, interrupting the long-awaited beginning. Although he wanted to add something, the man wanted to activate the force field, and he was ready to pay 36 years of his own life for 18 numbers. And then the owner of this space laughed loudly. He was surprised. Was Sai Min afraid to die? But he was still ready to fulfill his wish. It seemed that not long ago he was so determined to win, and now he was doing everything not to lose. Gon Leo seemed disappointed. He didn't understand if it was even possible to do that. Now it was obvious that it was, but he didn't know that from the beginning, and it didn't change the fact that the game was no longer fair. Thus, Sai Min received a total of 37 numbers, and all the marks on the roulette wheel were black, except for one that belonged to Gon Leo. It was such an unequal chance that victory was out of the question, or it would be a real miracle, and luck would not be on your side in the future. Gon Leo couldn't help but rejoice at this turn of events, as death was now guaranteed for him, so he suggested that his opponent take the remaining cell, but the latter replied that this was no longer possible, that a maximum of 18 could be bought, and that it was now enough to win. And then the god of death took the ball in his hand and held his hand over the roulette wheel, ready to throw it down. He decided that it was time to start the game, and that they should bet their lives. He himself could not wait for the game to begin. He threw the small ball down for himself and the large balls down for Gon Leo and Sai Min, and expressed his impatience to hear the sound of bones crunching. The roulette wheel began to spin at breakneck speed, and his head began to spin too if he looked at it for too long. Sai Min tensed up, but he was more angry and was already anticipating the sweet taste of victory. Gon Leo had only 1 cell, while he had as many as 37, and on top of that, he had a high luck factor, so this time Gon Leo would definitely die, and he didn't even try to avoid this fate, because that was exactly what he wanted. He too felt a rush of excitement and a desire to quickly achieve the desired rebirth into his old body. The game of roulette, as they say, has existed since the last era, watching the cells rush before your eyes and repeat at tremendous speed, and it is they who decide your future fate. This game was widespread among their people, the human race, who would try anything to feel a false sense of control and the thrill and rush of adrenaline. The ball was no longer rolling but literally jumping from place to place, and the participants in this game looked small compared to the gambling and the decision of their fate in the tournament. Sai Min stared intently at the ball, as if he didn't know that he had a very good chance of winning and shouldn't even think about his opponent, but he was still afraid that something might go wrong and the percentage of victory would be lower. This is a game where everything depends on luck and probability. It has nothing to do with strength, so it is inherently an unfair fight that should not decide anything in such competitions. And Gon Leo was simply ecstatic that his probability was so low that it was simply impossible to win. He was finally so close to his goal, and its achievement was assured. It was simply madness, which added to his joy. The ball began to slow down, with only seconds left before the choice was made and the winner determined. But a red 0 appeared on the horizon, so Gon Leo's chances, though small, increased. and then the ball slowed down completely on the same cell. It no longer had the strength and speed to jump to the right number. Both guys' hearts froze in their chests, and a wave of heat ran through their bodies. The ball did not move in either direction. Silence froze in the air. Everyone tried to comprehend the situation. Everything seemed completely absurd. The silence was broken by Gon Leo's cry. He was in shock from what had just happened and began to get angry, wondering what the hell had happened. He had already resigned himself to the fact that everything would soon return to normal. But then something went wrong. Sai Min's shock was even greater, only not as loud, or rather, even quieter, because a much worse fate awaited him. He would have to leave this life, even though he didn't want to. Unlike his rival, however, this passive reaction did not last long, as he was immediately overcome by aggression. He could not believe what had happened, because he had a 97.3% chance of winning, and even all the numerical values had been converted to increase the odds to 8,000. He had attracted power to increase his fighting spirit, which meant that the conversion of power and the conversion of chance had significantly increased the value of chance, so much so that the probability value was now 8,000. He simply couldn't believe it, which could only mean that Gon Leo's chance value was higher than 8,000 units, which was a crazy number that Si Ming himself had only achieved by using a special ability. The god of death himself couldn't believe it and was surprised because he was encountering such a case for the first time. It seemed that such a thing simply couldn't exist, and if it did, the chance was 1 in a million, and here that chance was standing right in front of him. And the worst part was that the master of this hellish place couldn't scan the guy who won because the odds were too high to do so. Gon Leo was incredibly upset because he couldn't be killed now, even though he wanted it very much, which meant that even an event like the Great Tournament couldn't end his life, at least not in this round. Maybe he would be lucky a little later, but the odds were still slim, considering his luck. The chance value is a numerical value that every awakened person of every race has at the moment of their awakening, including strength, speed, endurance, elemental power, and spiritual power. Hostile demons also have this data. The chance value usually affects evasion, the probability of unlocking abilities, critical hits, the probability of using skills, the probability of synthesizing high-quality items, and so on. These stats help you defeat your opponents, because standard effort alone will not allow you to advance very quickly compared to demons who have greater abilities from the start. But the indicators can be increased, which means that as the value increases, people's luck in life will also change for the better, helping to significantly improve their lives, leading to success, wealth, fame, and power. And now Gon Leo understood that this was the explanation for why he could not die, simply because it was luck. Although it sounded almost unreal to be so rewarded with something like this, the guy became very angry, denying that such a thing could even exist. Could it be that no matter what he did, no matter what danger he faced, nothing would help him get back into his real body, and this could pose a threat that he would remain a demon forever? If the fact is that this body has such a high chance of being reborn, then the question arises as to why the previous owner died, allowing Gon Leo to be reborn and move into his body. Now the blonde man seriously pondered this question, because now, remembering everything that had happened before, it was really strange, and as long as he has even the slightest chance of surviving, he will be immortal. The god of death also found this very interesting. He suggested that perhaps Gon Leo is one of the main bugs affecting the world, which is why he is so special. The demon, who had been the subject of discussion, was very interested in the fact that he had just been called a bug. He wanted to continue the conversation to better understand himself, but Si Min interrupted him, saying that it was enough to talk about it. He bowed, seemingly accepting the situation completely, but smiled strangely, especially considering the next sentence about how he was ready to admit defeat, so the so-called god could take the demon's head. He began to mutter that even if one can clearly see the future, it is impossible to walk one's path in life correctly. But he had been involved in gambling for more than 10 years, had won the whole world, but after losing twice, he lost everything. So that was his fate and he accepted it. Then Si Min raised his head and let slip that he could not keep his promise. And the master of this space was only glad, saying that fate, heaven, and will are predetermined, so there is no point in regretting it, for what must happen will surely happen. He took out his huge scythe, the blade of which began to be enveloped in black liquid, and the god of death summed up that they would decide everything here and now. And Si Min spread his arms, preparing to accept his fate, which was death. But as soon as the weapon was very close to Si Min, Gon Leo appeared in front of him, as if out of nowhere. he decided to break this rule too, and it seemed that he had decided to end his life in this way. But for some reason, he was holding the very sword that had gone through cruel battles with him in this body. The one he had just protected stood in shock at what had just happened. The blade pressed against Gon Leo's weapon, and the energy from the scythe continued to rage. It was difficult to hold back, but the blonde managed to do so, and a strong wind rose around them. Gon Leo looked out from under his sword and said that since he had even the slightest chance of surviving, he would try to be immortal, and since he was not satisfied with this option, he decided to deprive himself of this chance, his lips curling into a smirk. Sai Min was genuinely shocked by what was happening around him, while Gon Leo continued to argue that only the three of them knew about this game, and the outcome would be whatever the three of them decided, and that this could be played well. The god of death threw his scythe behind his back, annoyed that he had not been allowed to do his job, but he was interested in what it all meant and why he should show his character and protest at such a moment. Then Gon Leo nodded toward the roulette wheel and asked the lord of this place to look at it more closely, and there was indeed a completely different result. The ball was lying on the black zone, which meant that Sai Min had won after all, and that became even more annoying, because it could only happen if Gon Leo had tampered with the roulette wheel, and that was against the law of heaven, and even if the guy didn't know it, he should have guessed that it would have serious consequences. The red water began to rise in waves, matching the mood of the god of death himself, and the demon continued to insist that his fate was in his own hands, and then, pointing the blade of his sword directly at the face of the supreme being, demanded that he kill him right there and then. But if, according to the rules, this was impossible and he did not want to break them, there was a second option, namely that the god of death could accept the challenge, which meant that he had to make a decision and fight Gon Leo. Si Ming did not fully understand what was happening. He was shocked that he had just said goodbye to life. What was Gon Leo thinking? Anyone who entered the realm of death would turn into an ordinary person, losing all their power, and this was incomprehensible to the demon. This angered the god of death so much that, of course, he couldn't just put up with it, and since Gon Leo was so eager to die, he could arrange it. For him, it was just one more destiny taken away. He swung his scythe and added that he could fulfill this wish, since he wanted it so badly. But Gon Leo did not resist this attack at all, as he had his own plan for this battle in mind. The wound was on his shoulder, cutting his body diagonally. The guy felt pain, but the ignore effect was activated, and his body did not accept this wound as something critical, which was explained by the facts mentioned above. But immediately, a bright light began to burst from the wound. The body was recovering. The body was returning to its normal state. The rollback skill was activated, which was a real miracle. Even the god of death could not finish the guy off with one blow. Sai Mina was overcome with shock, which could have driven him mad. He denied this fact, did not understand what it was, how it was even possible. He had never encountered anything like it before. Even the Supreme Being did not accept this fact, because he immediately understood that this was a special case, an exception. Looking at the light coming from the boy's body, he recognized this skill. He knew it very well, but did not expect to encounter it at that moment. He immediately threw the scythe into the water, causing a loud splash, as the weapon was not light. And immediately, the god of death literally fell to his knees. Everyone around him shook from the giant, and he immediately switched to a more respectful tone with Gon Leo, realizing that he had inherited his power. It was difficult to say, but he managed to do so. Talking about the Lord of Demons, he confessed that he was a contract demon of his lord and had never broken the contract, so his space could not limit his lord's power, and for him, that was the only explanation. Inside, Sai Min trembled as he replayed those words over and over in his head, namely, the Demon Lord. He didn't understand if it was some kind of joke or if it was really a legend that was now coming to life. Tears rolled down the eyes of the god of death, saying that since they died, he had sealed himself in this space, and it seemed that a kind of joy and his lucky chance began to blossom inside him. After all, he had been waiting for the Lord here for a very long time, hundreds of years, and they dragged on incredibly long. And then, banging his head on the floor, he asked if he could continue to serve his master. It looked even more striking when such a large and terrifying monster with horns bowed before the body of an ordinary demon, the size of a human. Gon Leo's face was serious. It seemed that he himself did not expect such a turn of events. This was clearly not the effect he wanted to achieve. He just wanted to die, and this was his best chance so far. A real stroke of luck, if you can call it that, but it didn't work. And so the two guys returned to their battlefield, to the head of the statue where they had begun their fight. There was a great distance between them, and the atmosphere was not the best. Not so much tense as simply suspended from what they had just experienced. Such a huge adrenaline rush and such an unexpected resolution to the whole situation. But soon everything became a little easier. Both had enough self-confidence that at least one of them would give in to the other. Gon Leo folded his arms across his chest, as if he were the master of the situation. But Sai Min didn't look particularly nervous either, as if he had won. Even though the situation hadn't changed for him, he still had to lose to Gon Leo. But he only said that he hadn't expected his opponent to have such a story. Then he raised his hand and said that in any case, death obeyed the guy who fought him. So Sai Min had nothing to fear for now, because the man had no choice but to announce his surrender, which the organizers immediately accepted. 2 purple lightning bolts struck the main arena, predicting the appearance, teleportation, of 2 participants who were expected to engage in a fierce battle. But to the viewer, it looked like something that ended too quickly and without any spectacle. The guys appeared in their usual guise. Sai Min walked past Gon Leo, but almost at the end said that he was curious to see what the guy would look like when he showed all his strength, because it was something unique and beyond anyone else's control. There was silence in the audience and on the other side of the TV screens. No one understood what had really happened, and the commentator announced that Mr. Sai Min had surrendered in the first round, and he himself expressed his incomprehension of what the hell had just happened. They stood and looked at each other for a few minutes, and then everything happened as it happened. The demon near the head of their country almost cried, wondering why this had happened, how Sai Min could have surrendered, since he was their only hope left, and now even that was gone. But the commander-in-chief was in no hurry to show his emotions, even though it was whispered in his ear that this disgraced the entire state, because both participants had surrendered to some guys that no one had ever heard of before, who looked like they were destined to lose. But the higher-ranking demon did not panic and justified their fighter by saying that he must have had his reasons, as this was the first time he had seen such a relaxed expression on his third brother's face. The host announced that the first 2 rounds were over, and the winners were Kai Tian from Feng and Gon Leo from Yungo. The second part was about to begin, so there would soon be a new spectacle for everyone and new winners, because the next participants were invited to the stage, and while a new battle was about to take place on the battlefield, the events moved to a large hospital, where the participants who were injured but not killed were sent. The girl who was so proud of her strength but ended up losing to Kai Tian, even though he was a very strong opponent, came to the ward of another victim with a pile of bandages on her body, a broken arm, and a neck brace. Ujian lay on the hospital bed, bandaged all over and with his leg in a sling, while what appeared to be his biggest fan stood nearby, arranging flowers in a vase. She now realized that Gao Gui from Yugo was also there. They hadn't expected such guests. But she didn't start acting normally. She just lashed out at the crippled guy, realizing that he had also failed, and began to justify herself, saying that if she had been given a second chance, she would definitely have been able to prevail. She turned her head away demonstratively, and Wu Jun said that he himself knew that Gao Gui was proud, and from the very beginning, everyone considered her a shining star, unmatched among all the others. But the same could be said about him, so he did not humiliate himself, only confirming that giving up was actually a sign of wisdom in the situations they were in. And the other girl began to feel jealous, even though nothing like that was happening. He had already noticed that Kai Tian's sinister energy was not demonic, which was even more suspicious, judging by all the signs they had seen while sharing the same arena with him. A new schedule for the semifinals appeared. In Group A, 2 very strong demons, Gon Leo and Kai Tian, were to face each other, while Group B was waiting. And just as they were about to watch it, urgent news came in. There was an emergency situation. 2 participants in the third round, number 5, which was Jasmine, and number 6, which was represented by Lazi, had disappeared, and no one understood what had happened to them. But 2 hours ago, there was no sign of trouble. The girl in the wheelchair was rolling it toward the door, toward the women's restroom, when suddenly someone approached her from behind, and she immediately heard a woman's voice. It was an unfamiliar woman who called her sister and offered her help. At first, the red-haired girl even flinched a little in surprise. She hadn't noticed anyone approaching her. She didn't answer at first, trying to assess the person offering her help in the first few seconds. But she could see the naivety in her eyes and couldn't refuse, as it would be much more convenient, especially since she hadn't asked for help herself. she thanked the woman, who had already taken hold of the handles of her wheelchair, and this stranger did not give her name, only asked that she continue to call her sister. Although this desire to inspire trust from the very beginning was a little stressful. Meanwhile, her brother was standing in the hallway waiting for her, looking at something in his hand. The hallway was well renovated and bright, unlike his thoughts inside. Lazi prepared himself and convinced himself that he had to win, that no matter what or who stood before him, he was doing it not so much for himself as for his loved one. He was determined to take first place and cure his beloved sister. And as soon as he thought of her, he remembered that she had gone to the bathroom and that too much time had passed since she left, even for a disabled person, and anxiety began to grow inside him. He was already on edge. Lachi didn't understand why his sister was taking so long, why she hadn't come out of the bathroom and hadn't given any sign that she was delayed and that everything was fine with her. The boy moved away from the wall, but he still couldn't quite bring himself to go into the women's restroom and check. He couldn't have imagined that among the stalls in the bathroom, there was a wheelchair with a blanket and a pillow lying on the floor, and the girl was nowhere to be seen. If he had known about this, he would have rushed to her aid, of course. Meanwhile, a small truck was speeding between tall buildings and shops, smoke billowing from its wheels. The driver was clearly in a hurry to leave the place they had come from. Inside lay Lazi's sister, her knees tucked under her. It was not yet clear whether the girl was conscious or not, or even alive. It was a kidnapping, and not a very well covered one at that. The car was already speeding through a canyon, along a narrow road under a mountain, and the speed was not slowing down. It seemed that the kidnapper's plan had succeeded, and now they would set their price for the girl. At the wheel was the very woman who had offered to help the girl. She was a vile demon, and since she had set her sights on the sister of one of the participants, who was not even healthy, it was easy prey for her. Then the car stopped abruptly as soon as the ruler of one of the countries participating in the demon tournament appeared in front of it. It was the same demon in yellow robes who had been parasitized, just like Kai Tian. He was terrifying to look at because of his bottomless black eyes. He asked his mercenary if she had any new merchandise for him. His energy was too overwhelming, driving him crazy. The woman got out of the driver's cab and smiled, asking the man not to worry, that this time everything was fine with the girl, that it should be good merchandise, and that at least one thing he could be sure of was that Sister Lazi was alive. And then, with a nasty laugh, she began to count the dirty days, and even became insolent, arguing that she had already brought so much merchandise to the man that he could have given her a bonus, as if she didn't understand who she was talking to. But the ruler did not react to this in any way. He went to the trunk, saying that, as a good customer, he wanted to check the goods that had been delivered to him first, which annoyed the woman a little. He pressed the handle on the trunk door, and it opened. He immediately began to examine the cabin where the victim had been brought to him, but there was nothing inside except some kind of llama, so the man immediately asked where the thing was that he had paid so much money for. It looked like a setup to him, and the kidnapper herself was in shock, frozen in place, her limbs tense. The woman immediately became very anxious, as if remembering who she had gotten involved with, and began to justify herself, saying that she herself did not know how such a thing was even possible, because she had given the girl a sleeping pill, and besides, her victim was disabled and simply could not physically leave. Immediately, the space around her consciousness began to distort, as if poison or gas had been added to the air. The ruler said sarcastically that it was very interesting they had brought him a girl in a closed car, and she had somehow escaped, and then he reminded her that his mercenary knew very well how angry she could get. He inspired fear with a single glance, not to mention his real abilities. The woman did not know what to do now, so she decided to leave before she got what she did not want, saying that she would go look for the goods, because she certainly could not run far. And then, as the demon in front of her screamed, no longer in his own voice, that the kidnapper had lost his trust, something burst out of his neck that was truly terrifying. His body was torn to the bone, and a huge limb with sharp spikes at the end burst out of it. It was the giant leg of some strange insect, and the woman screamed in horror, now facing certain death. With one swift, powerful blow, the kidnapper's head was severed from her neck. This was her punishment for not keeping an eye on the goods she had delivered, or rather, not delivered. She got what she deserved for what she had done. Meanwhile, not far from this scene, one could hear slow but determined footsteps and something else. The sound of the stick that this person was leaning on. It was very difficult for Sister Lachi, but she took some props from the trunk, where she had spent a lot of time. The main thing for her now was to run as far away as possible, so she tried not to pay attention to the pain in her legs. She thanked the higher powers that she had managed to hold her breath when a cloth with a sleeping pill was held to her nose and mouth, thanks to which she managed to wake up early. She began to limp toward the cliff. Now the girl had a new problem, which was orienting herself in space. She did not understand what this place was and where she had been taken while she was unconscious, although it was not the time her kidnapper had originally planned. And then she saw, not far below, in some strange arena that did not look like something destroyed but was overgrown with moss, demons gathered who behaved strangely and looked very frightening. At the head stood Kai Tian, who announced to all the monsters like him that their gathering had undergone some not-so-critical changes, even though they had not been planned initially. He spoke with great difficulty, as if he was struggling to find the right words, saying that someone had already noticed their strangeness, so they needed to start acting much earlier. Because of his broken speech, it was difficult to understand what he was saying, and many words were not even understood by the girl at the top of the cliff. She was overcome with real horror, the fear that a small animal feels when faced with danger, with a huge and dangerous predator. She tried to find an answer in her head as to what was wrong with these people and why they were all behaving as if possessed. Sister Lazi suggested that this sect first traded bodies and then brainwashed people, but she immediately rejected this idea, because brainwashing cannot work so quickly and thoroughly, so the secret of this technique remains unsolved. Everyone seemed possessed, and it was very scary, to the point of making her body tremble. And then she saw a familiar face. It was a girl in a light blouse and a pink bow tie around her neck, and she immediately began to remember where she had seen this person before. It was the hotel administrator who had not been doing her job very well and had behaved somewhat arrogantly towards some of the tournament participants. What could have happened to her to change her so drastically? Her black, empty eyes, from which the same dark liquid oozed, were particularly frightening. Suddenly, she shuddered, her heart sank into her heels, and fear made her heart beat wildly, for she heard the same abrupt voice asking menacingly what this girl was doing here. Sister Lachi slowly turned around, completely unwilling to do so, cold sweat running down her face, her eyes reflecting all the horror of what stood before her, her legs buckling as if she were about to faint from the sight of such a terrifying creature. It was a very scary creature with empty eyes that had red outlines. It didn't even look like the iris of an eye, and in the middle of the face, where the nose should have been, there was a hole, and in principle, Sister Lachi didn't know what to do. It was as if it had been torn in half and stapled together. It was impossible to even understand if it was a demon, and suddenly this horror said that the master was holding a meeting with them. Sister Lachi didn't know what to do. She couldn't run away, given her weak legs, so all she could do was wait and pray that they wouldn't do something similar to her. Her brain shut down from the stress, and her body tried to recover so she could escape. She began to slowly back away, but immediately bumped her back against the tree she had been leaning on a moment ago. And then the monster in front of her slowly said that he had made a mistake, having fully examined who was standing in front of him. And with the words that this girl was not one of them, its head split into two parts, but inside was not what you would normally expect to see under the skin and muscles of the face. It was either bones or muscles fastened together, as if the monster was shedding its skin. But in fact, it was legs that were bursting out of his body. As soon as he realized that she was an extra witness, he started screaming for the girl to get away, but it didn't look like he would let her do that. His body split into two parts. And then the sister of the tournament participant came up with a good solution. She made her face as emotionless as possible and began to repeat in a monotonous voice that the owner had given her a completely different building. Since she could not win in strength or agility, she would try to deceive and outwit the threat hanging over her. And then the monster, presumably male, calmed down and looked more closely at the one who was clinging to the tree. It seemed that he fell for this trick and stopped, while she only asked the higher powers that everything would go smoothly and that she would not be killed on the spot. And it seemed that everything worked out. The monster did not even ask any unnecessary questions. He quieted down, and the paws on his face began to move less actively and slowly gathered into a pile. He turned his back, returning to his previous form, saying that everything was clear, and began to leave. The girl's heart did not beat any less fast. She was still waiting for him to expose her and for nothing to work out, and when the danger was far enough away, she collapsed on the floor and tried to catch her breath, her chest rising and falling heavily as her lungs struggled to keep up with her rapid breathing. The girl came to the conclusion that these creatures did not seem to know their comrades by sight, and thank God for that, otherwise she would have gotten into even more trouble. After calming down a little, she returned to her previous thought that she needed to get out of there as quickly as possible, before she encountered a more attentive and intelligent opponent who would immediately see through her. Sister Lachi grabbed the stick on the floor that she had been holding before, thinking that these guys were clearly not demons, but that something strange had possessed them. It was very noticeable, but she didn't know how to resist it, if anyone did. Images she had recently seen appeared in her mind, and she assumed that the man standing in the middle was also a participant. These competitions could be very dangerous, so she needed to tell her brother about this as soon as possible, before he got into trouble. On the horizon, she could see a huge tall building that they had encountered in the city. Although the girl did not know what this place was, if she simply ran toward the tall buildings, she could return to the hotel or at least to the city. But having defeated one enemy with her brainpower and cunning, she did not notice how she had let a completely different one get close to her, did not feel that she was already being watched from behind. And, in fact, someone crept up to her from the same side. The voice was very familiar, but still changed. And then the girl realized that it was her kidnapper who had brought her here to sell her, and she was glad that they had met again. Sister Lazi turned to make sure, but saw that this woman had changed completely now, for the worse, which could not help but raise alarm in her heart again. The woman had the same dark eyes as the other strange demons with mutations in their bodies, and her face was covered with bulging veins. She sarcastically called the girl a poor thing, laughing at the fact that she had already hoped to escape, but now it seemed that this was definitely impossible. The kidnapper, or what was left of her, opened her mouth wide, and the same thing that had just been writhing inside the body of the guy the girl had managed to trick began to emerge. The trumpet fell from the hands of the tournament participant's sister as soon as she saw what was now in front of her. Large insect legs were emerging from the mouth of the woman with black curly hair, fear completely paralyzing her body, and now it would be very difficult to change anything. The woman's entire head had turned into something very scary, and between something resembling the head of this creature with legs and its body. The former demon's neck had turned into a pile of pulsating muscles, similar to a tumor with a bunch of veins. And now the hole with fangs, which seemed to be the head of this monster, moved towards the girl, who was trying to cover herself in some way, at the moment when anyone would have resigned themselves to their fate, which is what the girl did. And then, with a whistle, cutting through the air toward the tragedy that could have happened, an arrow flew at the speed of light, all strange in color, and its tip was covered with ice, from which crystals even fell off. The arrow struck the monster directly in the neck, tearing apart the mutated part of the kidnapper's body, which at first glance appeared unchanged. Everything happened so quickly that the victim did not even have time to realize that she was almost saved, or at least feel that way for a moment. And then she looked in surprise at how her enemy, a real predator, fell to the floor and could no longer act against her. She had not yet figured out what had saved her, but she was too close to the answer, or rather, to seeing it with her own eyes. Immediately, Li Qi's sister looked back to see who had saved him. In her heart, she already had a feeling and guessed who it was from the very familiar handwriting, and now hope arose in her heart that it was the person she had been thinking of. But, of course, she was happy to see anyone who appeared before her, because her life had been saved. Standing before her was her brother, panting, with a couple of abrasions on his face, and she had a question about how he ended up here, although now was not the time to think about that. She had to seize the moment and get out of there. Lazi looked at his sister with horror and fear for his own flesh and blood, worried that she might be injured. The girl couldn't believe her eyes, and her brother rushed to her, realizing that he wouldn't get any meaningful answer now, and there was no time for that anyway. Both of them felt relieved. He hugged his sister tightly, and she burst into tears in his arms. Lachi tried to calm her down, saying that he would be with her, so there was nothing to be afraid of. They would overcome everything and leave here alive and unharmed. But suddenly, the family idol was ruined by demons with infection and strange creatures inside that transformed their bodies. They appeared behind the guy, who glanced at them out of the corner of his eye and realized that the battle was far from over. It seemed to be just beginning. Lazi immediately turned to face her, pulling his sister behind him to protect her from the threat, at least to give her a sense of security, although she understood that they could not cope with such a large number of mutants. Kai Tian was even more frightening with his smirk and his remark that this would be a perfect body for them. He understood that it would be impossible to defeat them, given the power that lay within them. The birds sitting on the branches of the trees growing around this area, where it seemed there should be no one, also sensed the danger and, after a loud sound and a shake of the earth, quickly flew up and hurried to change their position. Lazi waved his hand, and blue magic began to swirl around his limb, the energy twisting this power into something like a tornado. Everything became so bright that it was impossible to look at it without going blind. He jumped high into the air so that the energy could flow into his body from all sides, allowing him to release it and defeat everyone who posed a threat to them in this situation. This was his power, elemental magic. He brought his hands back, ready to strike the enemies standing before them. He had never looked so serious. Lazi did not think about himself. He only wanted to protect his sister, whom he cared so much about. The mutants weren't standing around either. They didn't wait to be attacked. They headed toward their victims to finish them off before they were killed or at least crippled. They didn't think about anything, hoping only for the horror that lived under their skin, under their flesh, under their bones. And then, right in the air, drowning in his own power, Lazi put his hands out, moving into a fighting stance, and decided that it was time to start attacking. On adrenaline, he shouted for his opponents not to be shy and to attack, but only him, confident that he could defeat these scoundrels. Such power burst forth from his hands that it was impossible to contain it. His magic struck the ground, hitting his opponents directly and kicking up even more dust, making it difficult to see what had happened to the mutants. Sharp fragments flew at such speed that it was difficult to discern what they were exactly. Ice crystals or arrows that pierced the rotting bodies and attempted to harm the two. Several magical circles appeared high in the air, resembling blossoms, and it was from them that all the weapons for killing Lazi fell. And when they landed on the ground, they caused a bright flash that blocked the view of everything. Everything around them seemed to fall silent. Lazi landed on the grass, leaning on his arm to keep from falling. Having lost his balance, he hoped that they were now safe, having given it his all. With a rather haughty look, he glanced in the direction where his enemies had been, and behind him stood his sister, leaning on the pipe and also trying hopefully to see something in the pile of smoke and dust. But then the boy was shocked. His eyes widened, his heart skipped a beat so hard that he felt it in his brain, and a drop of sweat, whether from surprise or slight fatigue, crept down his temple. What he saw frightened him the most. Kai Tian was the first to emerge from the smoke, and behind him, in the fog, he could see other monsters beginning to reattach themselves to their severed limbs. He realized that the bodies of his enemies were beginning to regenerate. His sister was also frightened and shocked. She exclaimed what Lazi had already said, namely that these demons had the ability to resist, and suggested to her brother that there was clearly some connection between them. The boy sighed heavily, trying not to panic so as not to kill himself and his sister just because of this, and to do everything possible to prevent such a fiasco. He tried to find enough strength within himself to summon another power, even if only slightly as strong, for battle. He did not give up hope that he would be able to kill these creatures, which had cruel and sinister plans for them. But soon Lazi decided to examine the bodies of his enemies first, so he summoned the ability he had, called a cloud, and immediately several waves were directed at the monsters, which were only getting closer, regaining their strength. Immediately, a clear picture appeared in his mind of where the demon parasites were located. Lachi realized that this thing was moving around their bodies and was most likely giving them their strength and ability to recover. The guy took a closer look at the living creatures inside his opponent's bodies, and they seemed very similar to some insects he had never seen before, with bodies that split into sharp parts and tails that looked like spines. Kai Tian ordered his subordinates to act immediately and kill these demons together, to kill them both in order to take 2 new bodies for his own use as quickly as possible. And the guys nearby immediately began to release mutations from their bodies and rush towards the brother and sister. Legs began to burst out of their bodies, more like legs with a bunch of sharp parts. But what was more frightening was what was happening to the normal bodies of the demons. Lazi tried to understand the secret behind the fact that these guys' actions were very coordinated. His sister also noticed this and, putting the pieces of the puzzle together, namely what she had seen before and what she was seeing now, came to the conclusion that it was like a collective brain. She began to think more deeply, and as soon as she fully understood the picture, she hurried to tell her brother. She cried out to Lazi, telling him that they had a strict hierarchy, which could help them escape danger, and that because of this, they needed to figure out who was in charge first. That person was Kai Tian. Everyone listened to him, and what's more, he didn't attack first. He let his 6 men go first, and then finished off his competitors. Le Chi's eyes began to glow bright orange, and with them came energy that enveloped the boy's body and caused a soft light to surround him. Power raged inside him, and he set himself to carry out his sister's advice and plan. He shot forward like a bullet, leaving the top layer of soil beneath his feet behind, while his sister covered her face with her hands to avoid breathing in dust. The wind picked up from his speed, and it seemed as if he would be impossible to catch. And then Le rose into the air, and behind him appeared that very glow, which began to release ribbons of light spinning around the enemy. It all happened so quickly that the mutant himself did not notice it. The guy used a powerful force that covered the enemy with ice, using a top-level C-rank ice element skill, namely a comet, whose concentrated cold energy caused all the bones to shiver, depriving them of mobility. The enemy was immediately turned into an ice statue, or more precisely, covered with a thick layer of frozen water, and everything around him also became covered with a thick layer of cold. It was unclear whether this was a victory or just a delay of a more brutal battle. As soon as the commander was immobilized and could neither speak nor communicate telepathically, his assistants fell to their knees and could not act further, as no orders were coming. The sister was very happy that they were indeed connected like a mother and her larva. Inside this man was the mother beetle, and the other larvae were obliged to obey his commands. This was their real chance. A plan immediately formed in her head, and based on the facts they had learned, if they destroyed this man, the others would be unable to act. The solution was in their hands. Le landed and thought about the fact that this was actually the first time he had used this S-rank skill. He had exceeded the power of the skill he was consuming, which could not help but affect his future performance. He thought that his little sister was not his close relative for nothing, because she was very talented. This flattered the girl very much. She was glad that she was able to help her brother in some way, even though she couldn't physically contribute to this battle. For a second, she even forgot that they were in the middle of a fierce battle from which it would be good to at least escape, let alone achieve a complete victory. But her joy quickly dissipated. First, she heard flesh tearing, and then she felt pain spreading from one part of her body to another. Shock froze her face, and she found it difficult to look down, afraid to see what had happened. But when she finally dared to look at her body, she first noticed red traces of blood on her sweater and what had caused it, namely the sharp end of a paw, and it was impossible to pull it out without damaging the tissue even more because it had sharp teeth like a hunting knife. And then the girl fell to the floor, unable to bear such pain, and behind her appeared the very woman who had originally kidnapped Le Chi's sister, with paws sticking out of her neck that were too flexible. The victim's brother was overcome with horror and anger. He couldn't believe that Le Man, whom he was supposed to protect, had suffered because of his necessity, even though he thought it would be safe to leave her at such a distance. Then, a sharp sound brought him out of his reverie. Although it was muffled, it was the sound of a cane hitting ice, which the boy had created. When he looked up, he saw the same infected people, only they didn't look as scary because of their familiar form and luxurious clothing compared to the previous monsters. The man in yellow clothes analyzed the whole situation, then looked into Le's eyes and admitted that they were very smart after all, since they had figured out so quickly how to act. Then he raised his hand, summoning his forces, saying that no matter how smart these two were, they still couldn't stop the first-level mother beetle, and immediately activated the ice element control skill, that is, ice shackles. Le took cover, expecting to be hit, but a second later nothing happened, because the new enemy directed his hand at the one who had been frozen and was therefore unable to command the mutants in battle. And when the guy finally realized that his death or injuries were taking too long, or rather, that they weren't happening, he began to look for what the man was directing his power at, and when he finally turned around, he noticed something he didn't expect, something he had spent so much energy on. He would not have had time to notice, let alone dodge, when a large paw with a claw began to move toward him, intending to clamp down on him. Suddenly, the claw grabbed the guy by the neck and began to strangle him, or worse, intended to bite through his neck, and he began to suffocate. Kai Tian stood at a distance, holding Le at arm's length, and squeezed even harder, already angry enough that they had left him with no way to influence anything by freezing him. The guy tried to get at least a little air into his lungs, but it didn't work very well, and his gaze was drawn to the body of his loved one, who had suffered greatly from everything that was happening here. Le Man lay face down on the floor, her womb not even moving. The thought crept in that she was no longer alive, but the hope that this was not the case remained, so he managed to continue fighting. but that hope turned out to be insufficient, so the guy simply closed his eyes, and hot tears rolled down his cheeks. He asked his little sister for forgiveness for not being able to save them, and it seemed that he had come to terms with his own death. But suddenly, a whistling sound began to approach from behind, created by an arrow cutting through the air at high speed, with green particles resembling petals swirling around it, a very familiar ability, and immediately, it was able to cut through the base of the claw that had clamped onto Lazi's neck. Kai Tian was shocked. He hadn't expected anyone else to show up to oppose them. He had thought that there were only 2 enemies here, and both of them were already almost in their hands. He looked back sharply, trying to catch a glimpse of who it could be, but so far he hadn't seen anyone who could do something like that. His friend and ruler took it more calmly, at least on the surface. The woman who had kidnapped Le Man was already captive to the plant, which prevented her from moving or even saying anything, while Le Chi's sister immediately noticed that the light around her body was growing stronger and the wound was healing. It was the effect of regeneration. And then someone landed on the plant. It was such a light landing that no one would have noticed if the person had been invisible. A true art of grace. As soon as Le Man raised her head to see who their savior was, she saw one of Le Chi's rivals, namely Jasmine, with particles left over from her magic floating around her. Jasmine anxiously asked the girl if they were all right, although if she hadn't come, it would have been much worse, and something had changed for the better, only thanks to her. Meanwhile, chaos began to rise in the arena. The host said that they had been waiting for quite a long time, but the 2 third-ranked participants, Jasmine and Lazi, had not appeared. This was something that had never happened before, so everyone was unsure whether to take action on this matter. Therefore, the organizers said that they were forced to regretfully announce that these 2 were out, because the picture on the table had changed. There were only 4 demons left. The rest had either surrendered, been disqualified, or died altogether. Of course, this meant that the rest would advance to the finals. The participants were immediately transported to a place with a bunch of pyramids, squeaks, and some debris, with a large arena in the middle. The participants were surprised, because it was quite an entertaining place for a competition. Shiao Jan immediately realized that they had chosen the second area for them because everyone wanted to get here, and apparently for good reason, as it looked truly epic. The wind raged around them, carrying piles of sand in its currents, and the guy continued to argue that this was the source of magic, so if they could capture these lands, all the power in the world would be in their hands. Opposite him stood a girl, the only female representative in this tournament. She had a cold attitude, raised her hand, from which bright purple energy began to emanate, and said that the guys simply had no chance. Since she had made it this far, it would be easy for her to pass this level. Her opponent hastily let the girl pass, saying that she was just the champion of the previous tournament, unlike him, whose ego was at an all-time high. The guy immediately rushed past like a bullet and managed to wound the girl in the arm, but her strength prevented her from feeling any pain or being affected by the attack, so she continued to stand motionless and without any obvious emotion. But Shiao Jan was not upset in the slightest. The boy did not expect a weak opponent now. He was hopeful that he would still take the lead this year and there was no other outcome for him. He was already a winner in his own mind. The host immediately announced that as soon as she appeared, the candidate from Lego launched her killer technique, but this did not scare the girl at all. Finally, she began to act, twisting so deftly that it was impossible to take your eyes off her. She immediately transferred all her strength to her legs to crush Shiao Jan with her shoes. He could not have guessed that he would so quickly find himself under his rival's heel, that she would not give in and would counterattack so quickly and strongly. All the participants and spectators watched this unfold, and it looked truly impressive, while Gon Leo gathered his strength and peeked at some of the techniques. Princess Yungo was amazed at how fiercely they were holding each other back, making it impossible to guess who would win. But that was to be expected, as they were both S rank, so their powers were almost equal. All powers had their pros and cons, so fire restrained electricity, but it was restrained by a cloud, which in turn was limited by a star, and it could be restrained by the power of flowers, and here electricity would be a good opponent. It was a vicious circle. There was no element that could be invincible. The princess tried to explain to her candidate that Kai Tian would also oppose the element of the cloud, but she did not know what element he possessed, so she could not complete the diagram. Then the injured Wu Jun joined the conversation and suggested that Kai Tian had the element of the star, but the source of his power did not come from him, so it could not be tied to such a scheme. The princess finally saw him. He had recovered, but he didn't want to discuss it, so he simply replied that scars suit men. There was no need to worry, they were just minor scratches on his body. Then Wu Jun asked Gon Leo if he could defeat Kai Tian, and he just snapped back that it seemed he had forgotten why he was there. Immediately, the dragon joined his thoughts and analyzed that he hadn't felt Kai Tian's energy in a long time. Gon Leo stood up, realizing that something bad was likely to happen very soon. The boy looked up at the sky and expressed his opinion that changes were coming, and they would not be easy. He would have to try hard to turn them to his advantage, rather than simply give in. Meanwhile, Jasmine was already finishing off the enemies who had attacked her brother and sister, who were sitting behind her, watching as the large plant captured their enemies, preventing them from moving. Le Man was still in shock and asked the girl how she ended up here, and she replied that she had simply decided to follow Kai Tian, and now she was here, which was actually very fortunate. Otherwise it could have been very bad. Jasmine was very focused on what was happening, replaying all the facts in her head, and now everything became clear to her, why this was happening and what it all meant, and now it seemed that everything was clear. She shed light on what was really going on. All these people were demons, but their bodies had been taken over by the race of impurity, and now they were all representatives of the race of impurity. This shocked Sister Lachi. She didn't understand how the race of impurity could have ended up in Yango. No one knows for sure, especially judging by how easily they turn others into their own kind and kill others. The only question is whether they will be able to keep this secret beyond this area. Jasmine held up her hand, saying that according to the predictions, this race would take first place in the tournament, and they would discuss the details later. Right now, they just needed to get out of this battle alive. The enemies had already managed to escape from their opponent's trap, which meant it was time to deal with them once and for all. The mutants' bodies began to transform and almost burst apart. They threatened that the race of evil should not be underestimated. It was difficult to speak because their power was increasingly turning them into monsters. Huge paws began to appear on their bodies, and Kai Tian and his ally threatened that no one could stop them. So the three of them had wasted their time starting the battle and should have simply accepted their deaths, because now they would be sophisticated, and now they were heading towards their victims, as they believed, at tremendous speed, hoping to defeat them very quickly. But Jasmine did not show any signs of nervousness. She turned to her brother and sister, who were hiding behind her, regaining their strength. Jasmine had a clear plan, and it was good that there were only two enemies here, as this would only work in their favor, and they would immediately defeat them, so there was no need to worry. Lachi, despite being completely exhausted, got to his feet and eagerly agreed to help, even though they could have simply run away, leaving the girl alone in the fight. But she had helped them, so now it was a joint battle, and they had to defend not only their lives but also their honor. The guy's arrows immediately cut off the enemy's limbs, disarming them for a while and causing them genuine surprise. Lazi had long understood and was now convinced once again that these guys were recovering their strength too quickly. Panic began to grow inside him, and he asked his partner what they should do now, but Jasmine did not answer, only gathering magic inside herself to prove herself once again, only now with maximum effect. She rose into the air, summoning another huge plant, which immediately began to grab the enemies and deprive them of the opportunity to resist. And it worked. The men were captured and morally defeated, but their curse only made them careless enough to continue trying to fight. Jasmine landed on the ground, feeling a slight weakness in her body, as she had used quite powerful spells, and her creation continued to rage, protecting its mistress and her new allies. Now various thoughts began to enter her head about how she had been using too much power lately. Her body couldn't cope with such heavy work, and that was why she couldn't completely get rid of these two. She closed her eyes, first trying to collect her thoughts, and then decided to try a different strategy, namely to lure the parasites out so she could focus specifically on them. Leaning on her staff, she decided to use her power, and petals and full-blown flowers appeared around her, scattering and floating in the air, emitting a different light. It looked incredibly beautiful and enchanting, and this power gave her confidence that everything would work out, as it radiated goodness. And then, from the very tip of the wooden staff, crowns began to grow, which now resembled a full-fledged tree. This was a technique for controlling flowers, namely transformation and flowering, scattering pollen, and luring out parasites. As soon as the parasites left the bodies of the detainees, the girl would be able to kill them. Kai Tian's eyes began to glow green, and he opened his mouth. It was painful and very uncomfortable from what was happening inside him, as if his own organ was being pulled out. Jasmine was almost out of strength, so she asked Lazi to hurry up and help her because there was little time left, and she was not strong enough to hold the parasites for so long. The guy seemed to snap out of his thoughts, immediately perked up, came to his senses, saying that he understood everything and would act immediately, but he needed at least a few seconds to find the strength within his body. He closed his eyes and focused on his inner self, summoning a cloud resonance. Blue glowing birds, created by his own power, began to hover around him. The parasites emerged from the bodies of the infected, from the wounds that were still fresh and bloody. Even more blood spilled, and the enemies began to scream and twitch in pain, but their movements were still restrained by the jasmine plant. The parasites were disgusting and slimy because they had just emerged from under the skin with a bunch of all kinds of fluids. They had no purpose other than to return to their usual body or find a new one to completely take over. Lazi acted sharply and quickly, and most importantly, decisively, to get rid of the small but dangerous enemies immediately, because it was incredibly important. Otherwise the battle would continue, and there was almost no strength left to resist the mutants, considering that one of the three fighters was not a fighter at all and could not fight, at least against such strong opponents. The arrows immediately, almost unexpectedly, pierced the parasites so quickly, throwing them out of the bodies of their old hosts, who were so determined to gain the upper hand over the ordinary demons. And immediately, Kai Tian fell to the floor unconscious, blood streaming from his shoulder, the wound too large and fresh. The second man was also soon on the ground, with the same situation, while Jasmine, having regained at least some strength, began to get up, and Lazi stood with anticipation of what would happen next. But nothing happened, so he immediately concluded that the two parasites were definitely finished, and at least he didn't have to worry about them anymore. But at that moment, something strange began to happen to Jasmine. Le Man immediately noticed her and nervously asked if everything was okay with her new acquaintance. The blonde was glowing, and her face was covered with either cracks from which golden light streamed or tears. Jasmine only said mysteriously that it seemed there was very little time left, at least less than she had thought. The light began to consume her, as if turning her into a ghost. The girl asked her brother and sister to come closer so she could tell them something. It seemed she was not who she claimed to be. But the battle continued in the arena. At that moment, the participant from the country of Yu demonstrated the strong fighting power of the reigning champion, while the participant from the country of Lei, although overwhelmed by the power of the elements, showed extremely strong mobility. It was not for nothing that that round was recognized as an early final. Shiao Jan said that in any case, she was just a girl from the country of Yu, so she could only suppress the elements, but he intended to step over even a girl for the sake of his goal. Here, they were all equal, all enemies. The guy gathered momentum, swinging his weapon to strike, ready to give it his all to end the fight as quickly as possible. But his opponent didn't even blink. Yes, her face was tense and showed no emotion, as if this fight was easy, but such assertive steadiness in place did not guarantee that she would not respond to her opponent. Shiao Jan managed to clone himself, and his clones were easy to distinguish from the real one. But now the girl had more powerful enemies, which meant she would have to exert more strength. The clones began to surround the participant from the country of Yu. 2 eyes were not enough to keep track of everyone here, and her anxiety grew, but she did not show it. And now the guy turned into the same clone, so now it was impossible to guess where he was. Now they all looked the same, all like ghosts. But it seemed that his opponent would find a solution to this as well. A bright light began to pour from her finger, as if she were releasing lightning, and she brazenly asked if that was all he was capable of. Immediately, the discharge passed through each of the clones, including the real participant, and electricity ran through them, each of them experiencing pain, and only then did the spell begin to wear off, revealing the true color of his clothes and body. Shiao Jun found it difficult to endure. He clenched his teeth so as not to show weakness and to withstand the pain. The magic completely left him, and now it was very easy to see him again. And now everything became clear to him. This girl, like him, had 2 elements at her disposal, but she was hiding it, unlike the guy, which made sense in order to pull out her trump card at the right moment. But his rival did not react to the provocation that she had concealed her powers, saying that the guy himself was to blame, that his own actions had forced her to show her power. She was as cold and sharp as a blade. Now it was her turn to attack, not defend. her enemy was immediately lifted into the air, and, unable to feel the ground beneath his feet, he began to panic, lost his composure, and was unable to defend himself in any way. It seemed that the girl was already in a bad mood and quite angry. She clenched her fist, and sparks flashed from her eyes, which changed color. She turned to the host and the audience watching them, saying that this participant, Shiao Jan, would not go any further. She immediately pressed him into the slab beneath her feet, which cracked from the impact of his body. Dust rose into the air, and it became clear that Shiao Jan would not survive. His organs had most likely collapsed inside him. He looked incredibly gruesome, with blood flowing from every possible orifice, including those that shouldn't have been, red liquid flowing from his ears, nose, and even from under his eyes. His body was now just a bag of bones, its owner dead because he had foolishly boasted of his strength and abilities. Immediately, 2 participants were transported to the main arena by lightning, and the demons in the audience watched with bated breath to see what would happen and who would remain standing until the end. But in the literal sense, only the girl was standing, and the corpse of her opponent lay next to her, and the announcer declared that the winner of this match was Yan from the country of Yu. Everyone who had been rooting for her became very loud, supporting the girl, and those who had placed bets were especially happy. The greatest grief was felt by the mother of the deceased. Even if he had the slightest hope of survival, with such injuries he would not be able to live, even with suffering. His mother immediately began to shout at the servants to immediately lift her son onto a stretcher, and immediately began to threaten that she would not forgive the country of Yu for this. Whispers and discussions immediately began to spread through the crowd about Yan hiding her strength. It was hard to believe, but now it was interesting to see how strong this girl really was. Uzan did not understand how Yan managed to finish off Shiao Jan so quickly. For him, it was not just a spectacle, but a real analysis of what was happening, so that he could take something from it and add it to his arsenal. But the girl next to him did not think about that. She simply admired the strength of that participant, which was truly impressive. Last time, Yan, at the age of 14, became the youngest demon to make it to the finals to face the most ferocious warrior of the demon race. And even then she was not afraid and held herself incredibly bravely. In just 2 minutes, the match was over, and in the hands of the little girl who had just begun to grow up was the head of the most dangerous opponent, as everyone thought at the time. It was the fastest final in history, but everyone who watched knew that Yan had not given her all, and now everyone could see that even now she had not shown her full strength. The girl paid no attention to the ovation and the fact that she was now the main topic of discussion for the foreseeable future. Inside, she was only confident that she would be able to win this time as well. It seemed that no one knew how strong she really was, and this added even more power and authority to her, a secret known only to Yan herself. But Gon Leo noticed one very interesting detail. He understood that he would have to face this girl if she proved to be stronger than the others, and he noticed that her hands had changed in a way that seemed very familiar to him, but he had not yet shared this information with anyone. The princess immediately interrupted his thoughts, saying that Gon Leo was next in line, so she asked him to be extremely careful, especially since they had all already seen how dangerous Kidnapping was, and her sentence was immediately interrupted. It was Otsyan. He looked at the demon with his usual gaze, but in the corner of his eye there was a glimmer of hope. He asked if Gon Leo could defeat such an enemy. It was almost a hidden order, and the arrogant blonde next to him did not understand the point of the question, because this demon had no choice but to win. They had all gathered here for victory, but then the voice from the TV interrupted, loudly announcing that they had breaking news. Immediately, all attention was focused on the screen, because nothing happens here by chance. Candidate Kai Tien, who was supposed to participate in the next round, would no longer be able to continue competing. His body had been found by a patrol team on the central boulevard. The patrol team was currently investigating the cause of his death, and an image appeared on the screen showing his lifeless body with a huge hole in his shoulder. It was a real shock to everyone. They couldn't understand how he could be dead. Of course, everyone thought it was an assassination attempt to remove a participant from the tournament, but no one believed it until the very end, because the demons prepared for the tournament couldn't defeat him, and here someone killed him right on the street. The princess immediately felt that this situation was ruining all their plans, because Gon Leo was supposed to be next, which meant that the main suspicions could fall on them. The list of participants was updated, and the screen showed portraits of everyone who had taken part. In addition to those who had surrendered and those who had died, there were 2 portraits of lost participants, and only 2 glowed with the usual color, indicating that they were still participating. Thus, the next round would go straight to the final, which was about to begin. Now, Gon Leo and Yan would fight each other. It seemed that the odds were even, but not many understood that Yan was the stronger opponent. There had been too many unexpected events in this demon race martial arts tournament. The final would be broadcast live, and for safety reasons, huge barriers would be installed in the stadium, and the two participants would be covered by a large transparent dome. The competition reached its peak, namely the final. Yan stood and gave Gon Leo her cold, piercing gaze. She did not care about the qualities of this demon, what he was really like, so as not to feel pity. It seemed that she did not have such feelings at all. The guy understood that she could kill him instantly, and anyone else would have been worried about it, but he was actually just happy with how things were going. Under the watchful eyes of all representatives of the demon race around the world, this battle would be shown. It was incredibly important, because the final winner was about to be announced. In other words, this was Gon Leo's last chance to be killed. Everyone who had encountered these two demons was waiting for each of them to show their true power to the whole world and finally stop hiding it and holding it back somewhere deep inside themselves. The battle of the strongest race of demons was about to begin, but someone decided that he could still play his part in these tournaments, and now he was rushing towards the battle arena. Chi thought that he could still participate, because his victory was important not only for himself and his country, but also for his sister, and even the guard's remark that the finals had already started and he could not enter did not stop him. Chi scattered the demons who stood guard, shouting that they had better move away themselves. He will not stop, because he has a very important business. And the guy managed to get inside and ran enough that the guards he overcame couldn't keep up with him. But they weren't alone either, immediately reporting what was happening to their partners, saying that someone had gotten inside and needed reinforcements. The young man rushed through the corridors, not paying attention to anything. He ran to Gon, mentally asking him to wait for him. It seems that he had something urgent to report. He did not realize that they were waiting for him behind the wall. And while Chi was trying to deliver what he had to deliver, namely to tell Gon Leo what Sister Jasmine had said, a guard was already reaching for him, stretching out his long gloved fingers. Immediately, the lost participant was twisted and plopped on the floor. The guards were satisfied that they had caught the intruder. Sweetly, they wouldn't be bull if they didn't do their job. The situation was quite different for both sides. Chi wanted to be released because he had his own mission in this story, but his captors could not sacrifice their work, and they were not in a hurry to listen to the rulebreaker. So the young man could not tell Gon Leo at this moment what he had to tell, and there was no point in resisting, because it could get worse. In the arena, no one knew or cared about anything. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the two demons who were about to fight, and everyone was waiting for the grand battle, to see it all with their own eyes. The girl had her own grudge against the blonde man in front of her. She recalled his words that the demons from the country of Yu, where she was from, were very weak, but Gon Leo, with his characteristic naive arrogance, dramatically covered his face with his hand and replied that it was so, and did not renounce his words. Then he mockingly pointed his finger at Yan and asked her if she was really sure that she could win the first place with her strength. He wanted to anger the opponent as much as possible so that she would not spare her strength from the beginning and finally kill him. And it seems to have worked. The girl's face changed, became terribly frowning, and anger descended on the eyes of the shadow. It seems as if everything around changed with her mood. There were only 3 seconds left before the fight, and Yan could not wait to pass as quickly as possible. And as soon as the countdown was over, she immediately jumped out of her seat and rushed at her opponent, activating her power. All that could be seen was a trail of dust behind her, so strong was her speed and power. The contestant had had enough of these taunts, and she could already see herself destroying such a cocky man. And for the audience it meant that the real king of the tournament was about to be born. Shao Feng in his past life and former body was always confident in his abilities and promised his chosen one that he would lead everyone to victory. So there was no need to worry. He was a real hope for his state. He asked only the princess of the country and his heart to rest at home for now, not to oppress himself with bad thoughts. And in return, as soon as he returned, he would immediately marry her. Both of them wanted it for a long time. And the girl replied that she knew it herself. It had been discussed many times. She trusted Shao Feng and his abilities. Who would have thought then that everything would turn out in a completely different way? Gon Leo remembered this moment and the words of his beloved that she would wait for him, but through no fault of his own, but circumstances. Unfortunately, he broke his promise to her, but at the same moment he was being attacked by a furious demoness who wanted to kill his rival. so soon he would be able to return to his homebody and his family. Yan, as if through the guy, causing damage, blood spurted from the new wound. Gon Leo felt a strong pain, sharp and spilling all over his body, boiling water. According to the information available, she had a double element and had a strong demonic transformation, which was not bad, but it seemed that it would not be enough to defeat Gon Leo's luck. The wounds on his neck and face began to heal very quickly, which means the guy needs to find a way to make her use all of her powers so that she doesn't just wound him, but immediately kills him with a single blow. Yan noticed that her ability wasn't much use. But why? Wasn't her opponent a demon of rank A+? The power of recovery shouldn't be there. Even demons of rank C don't always have this ability. Now it was no wonder he dared to challenge. Her hands began to glow with a bright yellow light. Lightning energy began to hover around. The girl did not intend to give up so quickly. One of her legs also gained a golden glow. Immediately she rose into the air, waving her leg, with which a ribbon with a lightning element was already forming. She was not frightened or misled by such a sudden ability to regenerate the enemy. So what? And now her foot, like a sharp stake, was heading to the chest of Gon Leo, which was already pierced by a thread with a sharp tip, which Yan held in his hand, sharing with the body of the enemy electric discharge. The girl considered herself the strongest demon, so to kill such a brat, who has not yet acted against her, in her head, was no problem. The announcer at the same minute said that they could see that the current situation on the battlefield was one-sided. The Youngwo player wasn't even resisting. It seemed that the finale would come sooner than everyone expected. Dust had risen in the arena, and from underneath it, the golden light from Yan's ability could be seen. But it wasn't clear what exactly had happened yet. The crowd was shouting that the Youngwo kingdom would win and Pren would lose. They should just finish him off already since he was not offering any opposition. They were outraged that Gon Leo dared to underestimate their country. Youngwo would definitely pay for it. And somewhere behind them, the guards were carrying Lichi away from the scene. They needed to get the guy off the battlefield as quickly as possible, and the guy still began to try to wriggle out, trying to convey to the guards that he had important news and should be released after all. Xiao Gan immediately said with a nonchalant face that she had already said that Yan could not be defeated by anyone, and once again she was right. But Princess Youngwo only shrieked her name so that she would not add to the moral situation, which was already not good. Wujin watched the battle, thinking of Gon Leo, while his ardent fan, who cared more about the state of her object of admiration, looked on, not understanding why he wasn't emitting any emotion. And it was because he now realized that the guy had made his decision after all, and he would not stand on the side of the demons. But something seemed to be a mystery to him, namely why Gon Leo wanted to return to humans so badly. He remembered his words that the blonde's strength was enough to win the championship, how he had tried to win him over to their side, explaining that by joining the demon clan, he would enjoy fame and respect. Even if he returned to the humans as a demon, no one would dare reproach him for it. But he then received a dry reply that the interlocutor was not interested in this. He looked at the starry sky, hoping that his beloved was doing the same and remembering Xiao Feng. He was worried that she might be alone right now, facing panic and fear, but he was even more afraid that the girl would think he was dead, which made Wujin's face change and stumped him even more. He then turned to the new demon general and with the calmest possible tone, added that he just did not want to keep his princess waiting for him, so he wanted to show up as soon as possible. Now Gon Leo was lying in the debris of the arena floor, the ground beneath him glowing with the remnants of energy from his rival's power. His clothes were all shredded, but apart from a couple of abrasions, there were no other injuries on his body. The first drops of rain fell on the guy's face, and there was disappointment on his face that he was still here and feeling all this, that he wasn't dead or even seriously injured. Yan on the other hand thought she was already a winner, but suddenly words were heard from the mouth of the one she already thought was dead. A question: did she give it her best shot? He couldn't believe that such a strong ability couldn't make ends meet in his life. Yan threw a judgmental look at him. She was surprised that she still hadn't killed this pathetic brat, but somewhere inside she was prepared for such an unpredictable turn of events. Gon Leo slowly got up, and through the torn clothes, it was clear that there were no wounds on his body, as if nothing had happened and he had just been thrown to the ground carelessly. And suddenly he asked an unexpected question about whether the girl did not want to become the strongest demon and take revenge on the clan. And it was this that finally made Yan finally experience some emotion other than coldness and aloofness. And it seems that she even became afraid. So she asked what her rival was talking about. And Gon Leo looked at her with a malicious smirk, asking again only more specifically, showing that he knew that to become stronger, Yan even practiced a forbidden power that was known as demonic transformation. And at the same moment, the nearly naked guy leaned his arm from which a red light was pouring out. The demonic illusion god's transformation skill had been activated. Such a thing certainly couldn't be expected. A new dark robe appeared on his body and he stated that unfortunately, in the future, the representative from Yu would still not be able to take revenge by morally finishing off her rival. He explained that the girl had allowed the demonic power to completely envelope herself, which in turn means that she will sink into darkness, losing her mind, and in his eyes appeared a picture of Yan completely chained, only she was in a different form. With a consensual coldness in his voice, he finished talking only about Yan's personal fate, telling her about her own future, trying to get something out of her, and then he added that the unclean clan would rise up and destroy all the powerful demons, holding them in their hands and gaining the power that no one could surpass anymore. Which meant that the demon clan would change. Yan became furious. She demanded that Gon Leo shut his mouth immediately. Her body began to transform. This was the demonic transformation. Only now it was 10%, but the process had started and would not be stopped. Anger was no longer in her control, so the girl shot out of her seat, heading towards Gon Leo, who had pissed her off. Her hair shone brightly. She was fast and quick as a hurricane. Her blow made a hole in Gon Leo's chest. Blood mixed with the color of Yan, who was now drowning in her red suit. And now the guy, as expected, was finally convinced that he wasn't wrong. He didn't think about the pain he was now feeling, only that this face was now all too familiar to him. The girl was turning into the same creature that Gon Leo had already encountered. It was as if her face was completely covered by a mask, only it was even instead of skin. She wanted to take revenge on the clan then, and Gon Leo was her motivation to become stronger. But she ended up in the most horrible and unacceptable future for herself. So it was only to the guy's advantage that she got angry. She would be able to help with her goal and him. They crashed into the wall of the dome. It was very wise of the organizers to install it. The lightning went through the sphere, leaving small cracks there. As notified by the announcer, the protective barrier was damaged but not badly, although it was a very powerful impact force. The power of demonic transformation comes into effect, which in turn means that the enemy's skills are slowed down, and Gon Leo, surprisingly for everyone, was filled with joy, as if he was enjoying the pleasure of physically abusing himself. But for him it was very good. Demonic transformation brings with it additional superpowers, and the power of Yan can hold him back. The regeneration effect was halved. But despite the small damage, the guards and workers were still worried, realizing what demons had fought, so they were already heading to the field and following the order to reinforce the shields as quickly as possible. But it had to be done carefully so as not to harm the spectators. The announcer announced that Yan had launched a strong attack. Gon Leo had no chance now, and he thought, like most of the spectators, that the outcome of the game had been decided. Yan had never been seen so furious. She was giving her all. Wujin thought that it was good that it was over. The last blow as promised. The guy would put an end to it. The princess on the other hand covered her mouth in shock. She cried out, realizing that the blonde man must be in a lot of pain. She wished that he would give up as soon as possible. But that didn't happen. The battle continued. The enemies were pinned in one corner, and one of them wasn't at all easy now. The dust was rising faster and faster with every second. It was hard to see anything besides the lightning bolts that were shooting out from where they were. Yan had already almost completely transformed. She was ready to end the battle already, but suddenly a passive skill, damage reflection, was activated in Gon Leo. His strength just bounced back at her. But that was what the guy needed. As expected, the damage reflection skill of damage reflection could hardly harm Yan. His eyes had already become cloudy. Everything was blurring in front of him. But that was even better. He would finally be able to fulfill his promise. Mentally still apologizing to Nana for making her wait so long. But suddenly on the loudspeakers the anchor began to ask nervously and angrily who was the one who had barged in on her. And a scuffle began to break out. Suddenly, a very familiar voice was heard, which addressed Brother Gon, and then abruptly switched to Sha Fengliao. The guy had something to tell. Everyone held their breath in surprise. It was Li Qi who had frozen the guards with his own strength. He hurriedly, because he had little time, began to inform that Jasmine was not a demon. It was Hao Jing. Now he knew it too, and then suddenly added that Sister Nana had asked Gon Leo to tell Gon Leo about it. and suddenly Gon Leo came to his senses, because she told him that he, or rather Xiao Feng, should win this match, to stand on top of the demon clan. The plans changed very abruptly, especially when the opponent had already almost finished off the blonde. Everyone looked around, not realizing what was even going on. As it turned out, Xiao Feng had not returned alone. Wu Jin understood what this was all about, but the others couldn't understand what this guy was talking about. And then Li Qi clarified that Xiao Feng wasn't the only one who had teleported and gotten into the demon's body. The world inside Gon Leo turned upside down. Now he was looking up. The raindrops seemed to have slowed down. His breathing became heavier. Now he needed to fight to win, not just kill himself at the hands of another demon. And while Yan was about to deliver the final blow, gathering all the strength in his hands, Li Qi announced that he also wanted to say the last news, but announced that after he took the first place, then he would tell Gon Leo about it personally. And now Xiao Feng mustered up the strength to confront his opponent. He crashed his hand into hers, stopping the transformed clawed limb from collapsing on him, cutting short his life. But it wasn't Gon Leo's hand, which surprised Yan. She didn't expect to see a backup, especially one that could stop her so abruptly. In her mind, she was already the victor and was able to achieve her goals. In front of her stood a huge monster that seemed to be from the ice and clutched her hand hard. And behind this demon's back was Gon Leo himself, who had already risen to his feet and was himself shocked at what was happening. He began to regenerate. His wounds were gone. His strength was recovering, and now only he came to a thought, deciphering the message to him completely. Jasmine turned out to be Nana. This he certainly did not expect. He had been near his beloved for a sufficient amount of time. Everyone watched the events on the screen, and did not understand what kind of a demon made of ice. Some thought it was unfair. Some on the contrary rejoiced for their favorite that his defense came in time. The past general was delighted. He realized that this was Gon Leo's technique. This was the ability he used when he saved Yongguo. So now he had no doubt that their country would be victorious. And the man turned to the Yongguo people, who were of course cheering for their participants. He proudly asked if the crowd understood what was happening now. General Gon was going to fight in earnest, which carried consequences that were only to their advantage. All of this meant that Yongguo would emerge victorious, except that they should have been careful with their words, because they could still see what Gon Leo's opponent was capable of at this moment. Yan's demonic transformation was 20% complete. She had bounced off the monster and now realized that since her enemy was summoning an ice demon, he was an interrupter. Shortening herself from the ice demon's attacks, she assumed, which she asked the guy about if this was his final stage, maximum skill, but she had no idea what kind of demon was in front of her. And so far, it had yet to show its full strength just because it was still recovering from the shock that Jasmine was Nana. And from what Li Qi said, Nana might have been reborn as well. He paid no attention to the cold raindrops. He didn't understand why she didn't recognize him. Maybe there was some reason for that. The blonde didn't realize yet that she had known who he really was a long time ago. The dragon apologized to his master. After all, he didn't know it was Princess Nana. To which Gon Leo replied that there was definitely no need to blame himself. She was indeed very hard to recognize. The guy clenched his fist and wondered the same question as his assistant about what they should do next. But the solution came to mind very quickly. Of course, go to her. There was too much to ask. Too much he wanted to tell her. Since she said to take the first place, it meant that there was a reason for it. Gon Leo completely gathered his thoughts and looked at his rival angrily, deciding that he should end it all as soon as possible. It is easier to win than to die, as experience shows. And so the injured but not much of a presenter was handed his microphone. The man squinted as the guy did so, as if he would receive some more harm, but nothing of the sort happened. Li Qi very kindly pointed to the microphone and said that he was already done with his speech, to which the announcer didn't say anything of the sort, didn't even call for additional help. He just felt relieved that he could go back to the normal kind of broadcasting, without any bystanders. He tried to return to his professional path. He coughed, clearing his throat, preparing to continue with the live broadcast as if nothing had happened. Immediately he turned on me, saying that who would have thought that Gon Leo would turn out to be an interrupter. He hadn't shown those abilities in this arena. He needed it so badly to die. But now everything had changed. The ice demon summoned by the guy was very strong. The battle between him and Lien was incredibly tense. The girl now had to try hard to hold at least her face. In a couple of movements, she was able to tie the monster with the golden thread she clenched in her fist, immobilizing the creature, which prevented Lien from killing its master. Cracks ran through its body and it wasn't long before it disintegrated into several large bars, dust rising into the air from the collapse of such a clump of stones. Meanwhile, Lian's demonic transformation was 35%. She was the champion of the last tournament, so she was not going to give up. The girl used all her strength to kill the demon. She began to smile evilly, telling Gon Leo that she had defeated his demon. It wasn't that strong, and she wasn't going to stop there. As she bent down on the floor, it could be seen that a tail with sharp spikes had already appeared behind her. She threatened Gon Leo that he would pay for his words, all of which signified that her demonic transformation was 50%. Gon Leo responded by saying that the side effects of the transformation had activated. This could be understood from the fact that it now seemed that the girl would not be able to get rid of the foulness. But Lian ordered him to shut up because she was invincible. Her belief in herself was at a height like never before. Her hair and eyes only became more radiant, and with another words that no one would defeat her, she rushed towards Gon Leo, leaving a bright red light behind her. But the blonde stood there without moving. He was unwavering because he believed in his own strength. After their collision, there was a big explosion, in the lands of which nothing could be seen at all. Of course, everyone was worried about their favorite or the one on whom they put their bet, but the result of this attack would not be clear at all soon. And this attack of Lian on Gon Leo was successful for someone. The arena was shaking. The shock wave raised a huge amount of dust. The spectators could not see anything that happened on the battlefield. And some girl, covering her face with a hat, made her way through the crowd. Leaving her seat, Princess Youngguo covered her mouth with her hand. She was shocked at how strong this Lian was, and wondered if Gon Leo definitely had a chance of winning. And the girl next to her didn't understand at all what this girl was thinking. She said that in the first round, he relied on chaotic attacks to defeat the candidate from Youngguo, and in the second round, she herself did not realize how things happened, but the opponent gave up. It was impossible to win the championship relying on luck alone. She had a strange feeling as if she was the one with such strength. This Youngguo state boy was also unlucky. He was facing Liang with all his strength. He would be torn to shreds. But Wu Jin only called her brainless. Gon Leo wouldn't have to give his best to defeat this Liang, which made the blonde very angry. She wouldn't tolerate such disrespect to her person, and already began to reach out to the guy to teach him how to speak to such an important reason, interjecting rhetorically what he said and how dare he underestimate the candidate from Uigo. Immediately, a rabid fan of Wu Jin joined the fray, asking where this girl was going, and then began to threaten this girl, asking what she was doing, if she also wanted to get a portion of anger. The guy looked at Gon Leo with calmness and contentment. After La Chi's words, he began to understand the determination of this guy, and he also wanted the blonde to win the championship, so that everyone could see the real power of Youngguo. Meanwhile, from the fog from the dust, Lian had already climbed out, or rather slipped out, scratching the floor with her claws. But Gon Leo was not yet visible. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. And through the puffs of smoke and dust began to appear silhouette in the guy. He stood on his feet, it seems not wounded, so his fans were immediately able to calm down and stop worrying about their favorite. He had a huge sword slung over his shoulder. He didn't have much anger on his face, but he didn't show any suffering either. He wasn't trying to give in anymore, and seemed to be ready to start acting as well. Lian's demonic transformation was already 80%. She wasn't satisfied that her opponent had already almost recovered. It looked like she needed to strike very hard to defeat him. The girl straightened up and dark red ribbons began to come out from her. Her energy was overflowing. Her body sometimes shuddered, because it was not easy at all to endure such power. And Gon Leo did not really resist what was happening. But he was amazed at such recklessness, so he asked his rival if she was going to complete the demonic transformation. After all, she was already more than 50% captured. The demonic transformation continued. Everything was so vivid that it was almost impossible to see anything more clearly. She asked in response, so what if she does? Even if Lian loses her mind, she still thought that the victory was worth it. Therefore, there was no way she would give up in such a situation. Gon commented that the girl's determination was too strong. But you don't have to follow the path of darkness to become stronger. He tried to convey that before things became completely unreversible, but it didn't seem to be necessary at all for the girl. She had already made her decision. Lian landed on the ground and it sagged under her feet. So powerful was she. Now she was unrecognizable. That costume was now her body and her face was not the same at all. Her voice had also broken. She kept saying that no one would stop her and she would become champion again. That was her goal, the one she wanted to fulfill the most at the moment. A bright light burst out from her chest. The demonic transformation was 99% complete. Space was already floating around her, so much so that nothing but bright yet dark colors could be seen. Now all the magic was directed at Gon Leo, who only reminded with insolence that Lien had already said something like that, so it was not worth repeating. He had no worries anyway, but his strength countered her. The guy finally moved, but not that very actively, as if his life was not threatened by anything. He raised his sword and decided that since his enemy had made this particular decision, he had little choice but to confront her, at full strength, especially after he had received a message from his beloved that he had to win. He said that it is time to finish with what is happening now. And here is another incredible fight of these two demons, who were able to break through to the finals, or rather to reach it without much effort, that only the higher powers know which of them will win. Absolutely everyone understood that the attack from both sides will not lead to anything good, because the participants put themselves in order to hit their opponent, and not to defend themselves. Lien was tearing towards Gon Leo, but neither was lagging behind. They were approaching at about the same speed, and neither was intimidated by it. The two forces came together. All everyone could see was that the red and blue light collided together, streaks of light developing around them. No one understood what would come of it, for none of them showed any visible supremacy. The dome began to crack, and inside it, the concrete that served as the floor began to break and splinter, turning into huge bars underfoot, not holding its former shape at all. And soon enough, the dome that was supposed to protect everyone just burst and scattered its energy around. Everyone cried out, not expecting such a turn, because the shield itself was not a weak magic. But there was something that seemed more important to everyone. The red light disappeared from the battlefield. Only a blue ray remained, which meant that Lin was the loser. The crowd almost stood up from their seats to get a better look at what exactly had happened. Lin's armor began to fall apart in small pieces. She herself was in shock at what had just happened to her, and in her eyes was a line with frustration and the realization that she had been defeated, even though she had used such a powerful force and form. At this moment, her sanity returned to her. She, being the youngest, strongest demon, had used the demonic armor and harnessed all of her power. But even so, Gon Leo had easily defeated her, and now Lien was completely naked and falling powerless on the cold floor. The end of her personality for her own sake. It was at this same moment that the girl finally saw the true splendor of the demon clan as it was, and the truth didn't seem so good to her anymore. Gon Leo, keeping the face of a gentleman, took off one of his clothes and threw it on Lien's unconscious body to cover all her bare spots, but didn't care much further. After all, she was his opponent, and not the most pleasant one. The Youngguo representative was incredibly happy to see Gon Leo, and the announcer also announced that this guy had won with an absolute advantage. He was now the new winner and a new star for all the demon countries. Even the girls who had already started almost fighting were distracted from this, transferring their attention to this message, because this is a very important event for all the demons who had gathered in the arena and watched all the events on the big screens. And here was the most important announcement, that the champion of this tournament was Gon Leo from Youngguo country. He was standing in the arena with his sword while confetti was flying in the air, and behind his back the ice demon lifted the covered body of Lien, who was unconscious and possibly dead. But there was also a not-so-official spectator in the arena. He was standing on the wall, and his dark cloak was mysteriously, like the very personality of this creature, evolving in the small air. A shadow covered him. The plan had changed. Youngguo country had failed to get the title of champion, so it was about time for their faction to move on to Plan B. Immediately he disappeared, straight into the wall where his formation came from. A trail followed him as well. It looked like a very liquid oil that floated in the air. The noise in the arena quieted down. It was announced that the awarding ceremony would take place a little later. The winner went down the long corridor to those who were waiting for him most of all. And now Lachi was already standing in front of him. In his hands was a small red box, with golden frames. The boy asked about whether Brother Gon was ready for what was about to happen. He opened the box, from which a bright star from a stone that reflected all the light was already shining. The red-haired boy said that Nana was already waiting for him, so let him make his decision quickly. Birds were singing around. The bright sun was flooding all the living things around with its warm light. Everything in the world seemed so calm, and one wanted only to be happy with this life. Two birds sat on a wooden board next to each other. It seems that they are always with each other, maybe even a couple. Looking at it, you notice how beautiful the world is around. All living things strive for peace and love. There was a huge field with a lot of flowers and trees on the sides. A girl in a light dress was sitting on a swing with her back to the viewer, and her long white hair was tied with an elegant bow. Flower petals were floating around. Everything seemed incredibly fabulous and somewhat mysterious, like a dream. Suddenly, the girl still spoke, addressing Xiao Feng. She was very happy that he had finally won. The guy was shocked. He would have liked to talk to her personally, but as long as he was surprised, it was already too late. It seems that it was just a mirage, because as soon as he came to his senses, he saw that he was still in the middle of the same city, with tall concrete buildings and austere landscape, and the same clear sky as in his vision, blocked by drones and aircraft. But all around were not demons, but ordinary people who were living their lives, happy, sad and doing everyday work. And then Gon Leo realized what this place really was. This was Shenghua State. The blonde could not believe his eyes. How did he even find himself here, and what was happening now? All the recent events were so sudden and fast that soon you could go crazy. A guy who appeared to be familiar to Gon Leo walked past him. It seemed to be Manhwa, but for some reason he didn't notice the guy and passed by. He approached his human copy, Xiao Feng, and addressed him, calling him brother, and then said that the weapons hoard was checked, wanted to talk about tomorrow. But his interlocutor interrupted him and recommended him to stay home. Gon Leo was still not clear and strange to watch himself from the outside. Wen Hua did not understand what it meant and why his acquaintance reacted to all this, and Xiao Feng replied that there was no need to worry, he will deal with the demons, and reminded that he also knows that tomorrow is the birthday of the man's son, so it is better if the father will be with the child at the party. And now Gon Leo realized, but it was just unbelievable. This future 6 years later, equally a day before he himself had time traveled. Suddenly around the weight began to collapse and explosions and fire engulfed the buildings around him. The demon could not move. He stood still, completely overwhelmed by shock. Everything was a huge déjà vu. He knows what will happen next and how everything will turn out, but what to do now and whether he can have any influence on the events. Right in front of him, the debris of the building fell and the dust that rose from it was autumn hot, because everything was very quickly engulfed by the fire, and all in front of Gon Leo's nose, who still did nothing to save himself. But suddenly, as the puffs of smoke began to settle, he saw the same girl in a light dress, and in her hand she had a staff. It was Nana, but she did not turn toward her lover. Only, standing also with her back to the guy, she happily said that she was very happy that she and Xiao Feng could finally meet, as if she didn't notice what was going on around her either. But the blonde was not thinking about her now. He was interested in what the matter was, and why this world was in such a catastrophe. The girl, keeping the secrecy of her face, replied that this was the real future that she had seen, and then apologized, because she had not asked Xiao Feng's consent and just dragged her here. That was why she did not give any reaction to what was happening around her. She was very sorry because she could only tell the truth now. The girl did not know how to deal with the future that would happen in 6 years. It seemed that she could not endure such a horror. Gon Leo began to leisurely approach her. The problem was that in 6 years, the fierce race would start their invasion and try to impose their order. Everything would be destroyed and they would be ruthless. And at that moment humanity had no strength to resist, no matter how they tried. The forces were not equal at all. It was a real hell, especially when children were killed. The princess tried to resist it too, but she could not overcome such a force, no matter how strong it really was. It was very hard for her both mentally and physically. She was reborn many times, but she was always late and couldn't do anything to prevent all these events. It was an incredible blow to her morale. Every time she was reborn, she would only go back half a year, but, by then, their plans had already been made, and there was no known way to stop these events any other way. Xiao Feng came up from behind and hugged the girl. He was hesitantly reaching out to her all before, afraid that she was just his imagination. But when he had already enclosed her in his arms, he wished that this moment would last forever. He missed her so much, but the problems she was talking about just didn't let him relax completely. The guy couldn't help but cry, and while sobbing, he said that he was the one who should apologize for Nana having to go through all this alone, even though it wasn't his fault. He tried his best to reincarnate himself back, but he failed. Xiao Feng had only experienced rebirth once, and it felt like he was being skinned and bones were being taken out, and Nana had done it so many times that he didn't want to imagine how hard it was for her to do it again and again. All this time he'd thought the system had granted him a rebirth, but all this time, it was the princess coming out. But there was a question that concerned him now. It was how she managed to pull this off. Nana got out of her lover's embrace and told him that after her first death 6 years later, her ability to foresight suddenly turned into a so-called rebirth, but it was limited to only going back 6 months each time. Nana couldn't change anything, repeated the rebirth for 500 times, and all for the sake of finding another way. She went to the territory of the demon clan. The space around them began to change, and a gorge appeared in front of them, the entrance to some cave, which Nana hurriedly entered. And now they could watch Nana from the side. Then almost all the demons were exterminated by the fierce race, and the remnants became slaves. But she met a strange demon, and it was the body that Xiao Feng was eventually reborn into. He was sitting on his knees and all chained up. At first it wasn't clear why he was chained up, but it soon became clear. Suddenly the demon raised his head and asked the girl if she could kill him. There was complete exhaustion in his eyes and he was clearly tired of his life since he was asking for it. His name was Gon Leo. All his relatives, his family, had been killed, but there was no way he could be killed. Even the fierce clan couldn't handle it. He said that the more he sought death, the stronger and more he suffered, especially mentally. He couldn't stand alone against the entire fierce race, and couldn't resurrect his family. Long ago he lost his motivation to live. That's why they made a deal. He had a technique that could bring back a longer period of time in the past as well as a period of time in the past. And also this technique could carry over Xiao Feng as well. Then the demon said words that Nana completely shared about the supreme task being to stop the fierce race. Xiao Feng was shocked. Now all the puzzles in his head came together, and Nana said that the premise was next. Namely, the guy should occupy his body, and Gon Leo had the benefit of not wanting to suffer anymore. No matter what method of death, it still wouldn't work out. Then it turns out that he left the system for Xiao Feng intentionally so that he would become stronger. Although the races are only made into human and demon races, but in reality, there are actually 4 races in total, namely humans, demons, elves, and fierce. Suddenly, Nana said with a serious look that they just needed to cooperate with the other races to work together to stop the fierce race. In the past life, they had taken the first place in the competition and seized control. Step by step they began to control the upper echelons of the demon race, and everyone else should not give them access to power and the second zone. Xiao Feng thought about the fact that this time he took the first place, so they had already stopped their first step. Therefore it could be considered that things had already gone to improve. And then Nana said that it's not that simple. There might be spies among the demon race. They easily infiltrated the arena, and even after she was exposed when they found traces of the girl, they didn't give up. It's not clear what they want to achieve, but their goal is the key to the second zone, and it's invariable, even though the tactics have changed. And now the tournament was coming to an end. There was a pedestal in the ruined arena, and the announcer invited the audience to congratulate the Yungo nation, who had won the final victory in the 46th Great Martial Arts Tournament. The ceremony of handing over the treasure of the demon race, which was called the key to the second realm, would soon begin. Princess Yunguo was already standing beside the statuette. The announcer announced that they were inviting the previous champion of the Yuguo kingdom, Mo Guang, to the stage, and this year's champion, the head of Yunguo, Lu Bingyi, came on stage. The girl already had a crown on her head. She was very serious. Nothing inside of her could believe that this had happened, that they were able to get themselves a victory. At this time in Yunguo, the people were raging with joy and shouting when they saw their head on the stage. There was a shout of joy and applause all around, as if Lu Bingyi could hear them. Everyone admired her. She is so young and already representing a country of champions. It was incredibly cool. It was very inspiring to her people that they have a great future. It seems that equally important people in this country were also very moved by this event. Almost a century had passed, and now finally Yunho would be reborn and everyone would be talking about him again. And in all this crowd, one of the demons wondered why Tian Sha was not seen among all the people, and immediately began to look around. And he was already standing menacingly over the little demon, showing that everything was not for nothing, and he was ready to start a scuffle. The guy wanted to be told something at last. Xin Li was in a great anger and very angrily, shouting, asked about the whereabouts of Gon Leo, as if he had not heard that he was taking part in the tournament and, moreover, had won it. The boy was battered and bruised, his face was swollen, and one eye was not open at all, and he was very sore and buzzing. The two rulers met face to face before the reward, and the atmosphere became somehow more tense than expected. At first there was a grave silence, but the pause dragged on and something had to be said. But the ruler of Yuguo only said one stupid thing. He sighed heavily and said that he never thought that the key to the second realm would soon be placed in the hands of a woman, disregarding Lu Bingyi as much as possible. And then he also asked boorishly if there was no one in Yuguo who could accomplish this. But the girl tried to keep her pride and face, so she just turned her head and said that Mo Guang's daughter is also an outstanding heroine. Uncle Gon used to fight with her father on the same battlefield to face the enemy together, and Li always thought that a person like you, who has gone through so much hardship, would not judge people so superficially based on gender. The man looked away and thought, the key to the second realm is the treasure of the demon race. Even if one has to die, one cannot let it be lost. And so the two rulers touched the ball, and it began to glow brightly, blinding the demons. Small threads of light began to stretch to Lu Bingyi's hand, sealing themselves on her wrist, leaving a trace, a pattern, as a sign that the ruler of Yungo now possessed this key. She looked at her wrist and thanked Uncle Guang for the reminder. Lu Bingyi promised that she would definitely keep it and keep it in her memory forever. But the presenter did not stop talking, doing his job, which began to annoy Mi Guang. The guy announced that the key ceremony was officially over and they could move on to other business. But the presenter did not have time to finish speaking. A huge stake was already sticking out of his chest, his shirt was covered with blood, and the demon himself at the beginning did not even realize what had happened at all. It was completely unexpected, nothing led to it, shocked everyone. The rulers were also frightened after seeing this. Mi Guang did not understand who even dared to commit an attack right during the ceremony in the arena, in front of everyone, without fear of punishment for this action. And as if by order, the question was answered when the speaker's body fell to the floor, revealing the identity of the one who had delivered such a blow. And it wasn't a demon at all, not even a creature of the familiar kind, but something far more terrifying. It was a flamboyant member of the fierce race. He had a mask on his face, but it didn't hide a smug smile, a very evil one, as it should for a monster of the fierce race who was an A+ rank warrior. In an eerie voice, he announced that it was time for them to start implementing their plan, which meant that something very grandiose was beginning and it would not lead to anything good. As it turned out, he did not come alone. A lot of energy was already reaching out to the demons, dark and the kind of energy that hurts, abusing the body and mind of others. The fierce ones were already attacking the demons. Some were already maimed, pierced with claws. Some were just getting closer, trying to intimidate them first. There was a commotion in the stands, shouting rising up and shaking the air. The furious had already started their hunt and were trying to exterminate as many demons as possible who had done nothing of the sort. Just then Wujin took off his bandages and ordered everyone to get ready. They need to protect their head, and do it as fast as possible so nothing happens to her. It's their duty. And his main fan, as she thought of it, was ready to side with him, just to get some more recognition from him. And she did start to be surrounded. Her legs seemed to start shaking, but she had enough strength to defend herself for a while at least. She would have to hold out until the backup. The furious already knew that Lu Bingyi had the key to the second area, so she automatically became their main target, and politely no one would ask her to give up what this race needed. Immediately, a guy with a scar on his face appeared in front of her and began to assert that the head had nothing to worry about. The Yongguo troops would also be on her defense and could provide her with safety. Shang Fio continued to chat with Nana and suggested that there must be chaos in the human race. Xin Jin had declared a military coup, even when Hua had begun to act. The girl, on the other hand, did not look, sadly averted her eyes and said that when she first returned, her body was very weak. They were already lying in an empty white space, and a huge magic ring appeared in front of them, which was only expanding. Xiao Fio was with his eyes closed, and Nana kept saying that she couldn't use all her power and she didn't have time to stop Xin Jin, which was the saddest thing for her. The blonde girl stood up and looked at her lover who didn't seem to hear her anymore. A tear ran down her cheek. Bitterness was eating her up from the inside. It was hard to say goodbye to him once they met again. Suddenly, Wen Hua appeared behind her back, asking if the commander was still awake, and Nana quickly wiped away the tear so as not to show all the emotions she was still feeling. The princess pulled herself together and ordered the guide to summon all of Xiao Feng's dearest teammates, and soon enough, everyone was standing around her, beaming along with the guy who couldn't hear them right now. In the previous life, they had started a coup at the wedding banquet, but back then, it was successfully stopped by Xiao Feng. This time, the guy didn't wake up, therefore their actions would only become more intense. Because of this, Nana used her power in advance to create puppets of their most trusted commander's comrades, and the team was shocked by what they saw themselves. It was the flower limit ability, the soul of a lie that exposes a dagger, summons puppet clones, allowing them to easily fool the liar. Events that had happened before began to repeat themselves. The wedding where all the horrible things that would later lead to the apocalypse began. In fact, not the real bride and groom today officially created a cell of society. All the puppets participating in the banquet and killed just memorized the behavior of those who killed them, because the dead were not real, just puppets, creatures that appeared after the ability of the soul of the lie, and could only be recognized after death, when they had already shed their pretend appearance. The military vehicles were already moving through the streets. They would protect Nana and her lover's body, and would leave the base beforehand. The target of the Shinjin army's attack is Yungguo, namely the country where Gon Leo is. So Nana left your equipment 0 and let him leave with it. And that sword appeared in the demon's possession for a reason. As soon as Xiao Feng encountered him 0, he would definitely have to take back his weapon. And as soon as that happened, the princess was very close by. Everything was going according to plan. Therefore everything was very good. Immediately, Xiao Feng became very encouraged because he heard that Manhwa and the others were still alive. So all that tragedy that was raging inside him had been pacified. But then the guy's face changed. A reasonable question appeared in his mind, which changed the course of events a bit. He wondered, what about Nana herself? What about her body? The ability to copy was very mentally draining, plus copying so many people at once. Nana smiled, even though she had been worried about it before, and assured him that he should not worry, because they were safe now, and began to reveal the cards completely. That during the copying of that girl from the race of demons her power has largely recovered, so more power and energy was invested. Nana had originally planned to defeat Kai Tian with her own strength to stop the operations of the fierce race, being in the incarnation of Jasmine. And then she saw Gon Leo in the competition. The girl didn't know why, but her original plan had undergone a change, so she decided to put all her hopes on the guy. It would be more reliable that way. Back then, when she glowed, she defeated Kai Tian and the others. But after exhausting her powers, the copied body will disappear. The girl has no time to find who is behind the scenes of the fierce race that invaded their bodies. Information is unfortunately very scarce. This time the time travel time again is too long, and her ability to rebirth is completely lost. So this is the last chance for humans, and not only for humans, for all races. Xiao Feng asked the lady of his heart to rely on him, and no way would he allow the fierce race to obtain the key to the so-called second realm. Nana looked at him as if she didn't know how persistent the guy was in his goals and standing for peace. But he only turned serious and said that he would definitely deal with them. The illusion of the world began to fall apart, to split into pieces. Nana felt sad. She wanted to continue the walk. It had been a long time since they had been alone together and enjoyed the moment. But unfortunately, this world wouldn't last long, and as a sign of that a few pieces were flying right under their feet. So they had to finish what they were doing now, and immediately hugged Nana about when he will win the victory over the fierce race. And as soon as that happens, he will immediately go to look for his beloved. And the girl promised that she will take care of Xiao Feng's body, waiting for his return. Then she moved away from the guy and remembered that there was something else that needed to be said to him. The air was cut through by a weapon that was shaped like a sickle, only much larger and not as curved. At least that's how it seemed from such a sharp and fast movement. It was the fierce fighting demons, who had already rushed to the arena to protect the princess. And in principle everyone. Such a large-scale event was held, and the defense was not prepared. It caused misunderstanding and condemnation. So one of the organizers and fell in spirit. It is still his fault, but it turned into a big problem, because he lost vigilance, and he was already reaching for the hand of the fierce from the dark space. But he did not have time to hurt the man. His body was already cut by the weapon of one of the demons. There was a low scream of pain. He realized how close he was to saying goodbye to his life. And then he looked up. One of the participants ordered his brother to get up, but he kept saying that there was no need to protect him. They had come for the key, so they had a different goal. But worry, as he was assured not to worry. Below the second stands on guard the second brother, so they also will not have a very easy way. One of the fierce ones had a very bad time of it. Cuts ran down his body. He was screaming at how much his body was being tormented by the tortures and wounds that were increasingly appearing on him. They were blades from the remote weapon of one of the demons who had run out to the center of the arena to confront these scum. He still insisted on protecting the overlord, and not just because she ruled the country. He had nothing to do with her. Lu Bingyi had the key to the second realm, which was important to all the demons. It was not for nothing that they are fighting in this tournament. But the commander of the Yongguo army, Xie Qin, also had his own motives. He was tormented by his conscience that it was their army's fault for not providing sufficient defense. But suddenly, a very fast dark shadow came over those who were trying to oppose this race. Before they knew it, they were already under the control of their opponents. They immediately looked under their feet and couldn't understand what it was, although they should have reacted immediately to protect themselves, because none of this race's power would be directed towards peaceful actions. Xie Qing was immediately tossed into the air, flipped over and was drawn straight into the dark hole. But suddenly bright scarlet blood spurted from him. It was an incredible shock that he had no time to resist. Even before the recent shadow beneath his feet became a viscous black slurry that sucked the commander in. Now only a tail could be seen from him, but it wouldn't stay on the surface for long either. The mask on his face began to split open, revealing half of his face, crazy eyes and a crazed smile. Dark energy condensed around his hands as if shackling him. It was Wu Shuang, a star warrior of the 510th Squad, a star mage who possessed shadow ability. He sent this incomprehensible liquid that began to turn into hands directly at Xie Qing, who successfully landed on one knee. The guy was left without the ability to move in any way. Black ribbons were enveloping him. The blonde guy didn't realize what kind of force it was. He had a clear feeling that he was being sucked in. And as soon as Lu Bingyi's protector was eliminated and the way to her was opened, the fierce immediately started running towards her to take away the key at any cost, and immediately chose the method by killing her. But the girl could not defend herself. Because of such a slow reaction, the clawed finger was already at the very eye of Lu Bingyi. A little more and she would be left without eyes. But suddenly a bright green light interrupted everything, maintaining the shape of the cross, blinding the enemy and disarming them. It was someone's ability, which meant someone had come to her defense after all. Of course it was Wu Jin. Not only was he worried that these creatures might get the key to the second realm, but also the safety of their ruler, who stood behind his back worriedly, as if she couldn't do anything herself while the guy fought off the threat to her life. And as soon as he dealt with one, he immediately noticed that behind him another fierce one was approaching him. His face was completely masked, but the demon was not going to let his own and prevent the attack. So he swung around and directed all his power at these creatures and the liquid they were controlling. Wu Jin had never thought that these guys could turn into elements, but now it was clear. When attacked they turned into shadows, which was a very useful ability indeed. And now this shadow turned into the head of a huge snake that opened its mouth to devour its opponent while it realized that it couldn't attack unlike them. And then the shadow turned into material ribbons that began to grab Wu Jin and he couldn't get away from them. His hands couldn't move in any way. His head and body were already enveloped by this strange something. The guy tried to free himself somehow, but he couldn't move his arm further than a couple of centimeters, and his body had not fully recovered and was weak to resist. Currently the strongest power of the demonic clan was wounded and exhausted. The guy in the broken mask, laughing madly, remembered that it was said that the tournament had attracted the strongest of the demonic clan. He laughed at their strength, asking if this was also everyone who could defend themselves. He thought they were strong. And then he directed his strength at Lu Bingyi, saying that the entire demon race was just weaklings who dared to come to the tournament, in which strength and the ability to use their brains correctly won. Lu Bingyi was already restrained and could not do anything. Her hands were twisted and bound to her body, preventing her from making even the slightest movement. In this situation, she felt terrible. Nothing could be done. Of course, for everyone it was a shock. Some could not allow the ruler of Yongguo to be captured, or even killed, and some could not allow that the key, which is honestly handed over at the tournament for demons, fell into the hands of those who should not have it. But for the fierce it was a real pleasure. They have in their hands in the figurative and literal sense were the winners of the tournament, and the key, which they have been hunting for so long, and even had to change the plan during the execution of the previous plan. And suddenly from the back of the guy was attacked by an ice demon of enormous size, and then pushed him face straight into the ground, breaking through the concrete. It was an unexpected denouement, and help at the most necessary moment. and while this bulky guy was trampling the guy right into the floor, the one whose ability it was, and who gave the order to so engage the ice monster to engage, appeared behind them. It was Gon Leo. His face was blank from what he had learned not so long ago, but the guy could not have imagined that his not-so-long absence could lead to the fact that everything was already wrapped up in this way. But now he was also growing anxious inside, because he knew what inaction could lead to and what the world would turn into. All present literally revived at the sight of Gon Leo. His appearance was like a fresh breath of air after a long stay in a stuffy, hopeless atmosphere. Hope, long faded in the eyes of many, flared up again, albeit timidly, but brightly. He entered quietly, but his presence in itself inspired confidence. Demons knew, if anyone could solve this situation, it was him. The guy had already repeatedly coped with the most difficult, almost hopeless tasks, pulling himself out of places from which no one returned. And now, when everything was hanging by a thread, his appearance inspired more confidence than any words of the leaders. Gon Leo could not just help, he could change everything. But there was still the question of how he would fight alone against such a strong army. There were so many enemies. A whole army might not be able to handle them. There was no mention of one man. But the man who knew her personally, understood what she was up against. He himself had once gone up against him in the arena, even if only briefly, but it was enough to feel the power. Xiao Min knew what he was capable of, and most importantly, he was not alone. He had allies at his back, each of them dangerous in their own right, and together they were an almost impenetrable fortress. But the man couldn't shake off his anxiety, and yet in the back of his mind there was hope that no matter what, she would find a way to stand. And then he also added about everyone looking behind his back. He had brought an entire army, and there were many, an entire army, of ice monsters standing there. They were of different sizes, respectively, and different dangers. Gon Leo was sure that the fierce clan would soon fall, and he was ready to contribute to this. He was very serious and was certainly not going to retreat. There was a whole darkness of them. They looked like a huge sea, and against them was a bunch of furious right in the middle of the battle arena, which was already covered in dark light. It looked like something big was about to happen. Wu Jin was very happy to see Gon Leo here. The ice demons immediately set about trying to rescue everyone who had been captured by the fierce ones and left unable to move. And they succeeded. The captives could finally stretch their limbs properly, and Second General Youngguo could finally take the fight into his own hands and help this army defeat all this evil. Now they at least suspected what the enemy was capable of. Xie Qin thought that protecting the head was the most important thing anyway, and now the smartest move would be to retreat so that she wouldn't get hurt. Wuxun was surprised by this at first. He had slightly different plans. But then he thought that it was not a bad decision in principle. Let Gon Leo deal with everything by himself. He believed that the guy would be able to solve everything, and others would only hinder him. The Yuguo Lord, Guan, who was Yan's father, asked the guy next to him about how his sister was doing. Was everything all right? It was completely inappropriate in this situation, but if he asked about it, it still mattered, because this guy, Xiao, Yan's older brother, who was also a C-rank demon, said that everything was fine and she was not seriously injured. She would wake up soon. Her opponent's last strike was quite restrained. His father had not expected this. None of the possible scenarios he had been running over and over in his mind did not include what was happening now. He froze, as if time had stopped for a split second, and with it, all the confidence he held so dear, because the whole plan of the demons came down to one thing. To him, they simply had no other choice but to influence the situation now. Alas, will be incredibly difficult. This realization hit harder than any blow, undermining him from the inside. And then, at such a moment, as Gon Leo stood in front of the thick fog of dust and smoke, the voice of the announcer was heard, and he began to talk about the fact that 200 years had passed since those very events. From the time when Youngguo was known and remembered as a powerful country, and now before them stood the one who would bring glory back to these demons and help basically the entire demon clan. Cameras were pointed in the center of the course of all events. It was an opportunity for them to catch all the news for the airwaves. This is a sensation and something that would like to be immortalized forever. And so it all began, so abruptly that no one expected it. Youngguo could now take the lead, and claim to be the country that would do away with those who posed a threat. All the ice monsters began to shout and raise the wind from their voice and breath. Only Gon Leo stood still. These were his warriors, and as soon as he flippers the command, they will immediately rush into battle, on the fierce. Of course, the chance of being defeated remained, but inside was faith and hope that such unique abilities that he has will help the guy to deal with the villains. Other demons, in their cities and countries, continued to watch everything from huge screens, for all the horror that was to pass the winner of the tournament, and somewhere far inside they still had a sense that on this all depends on their lives and who will be superior to other races. The general had become worried in the past, for he was well aware that the Shadow Army was the secret weapon of the fierce clan, and it had never lost in the history of its existence. This sowed doubts about whether it would lose for the first time now. Wu Hui's father understood that although General Gon always brought surprises with him, but the opponent now was much more experienced in battle, and for what it was worth, just plain stronger. Anyway, they were high-ranking warriors, while Gon Leo was now just a lisping a plus-rank soldier who hadn't been promoted yet. But the confrontation had already begun, no matter who pondered what, but the fight just had to be unpredictable. One of the ice statues grabbed the opposing fighter with its hand, and immediately its limb began to encompass the shadow that was controlled by that race, slipping all the way to its shoulder. Thus Gon Leo's creation was left without an arm at all, which was broken by several shards and was already falling freely to the floor. This was the first plus on the battlefield in favor of the fierce race. The ice monster was shattered into several parts of its body in a moment, and the dark unknowable thing that looked more like a liquid but was definitely an ability of the opponent's directly burst into the ground beneath it to emerge in an unexpected place for the opponent. He rushed straight at Gon Leo at breakneck speed, hoping not to kill, but to strike a decent blow to disarm the one who was one of the biggest dangers to them at the moment. The shadow began to spin right over the blonde man, thinking he was just an asshole who knew no boundaries. They wanted to deal with the obstacle to their complete rule over the race as quickly as possible. Gon Leo stood calmly, as if he didn't care at all that the shadow had now turned into huge hands gripping him in a circle, trapping him in a stalemate and giving him no way to retreat. And immediately the fake limbs collapsed. It seemed that the guy they were aiming at became just a scone, a fly that was crushed in a single movement. The furious thought that they had already definitely dealt with the enemy. Watching from a safe distance, the representative of the race that for centuries had tried to subjugate the others could barely contain his triumph. His lips stretched in a vicious, predatory smile, which read ancient pride and grim satisfaction. Before his eyes the enemy, the one who had recently seemed dangerous, now slowly disappeared, morally, physically, literally turning into nothing. The eyes of the observer reflected sincere joy, and although the battle was not yet finally over, he already felt that the victory was close, and the world would bow its head to his race again, as it had been planned from the beginning. And then proudly declared that he was a C-rank representative with a 10th level, and it was not worth it just to simply just even get into this fight, realizing that nothing will definitely not work. The demons who had pinned their hopes on Gon Leo froze in anticipation of what will happen next and whether their hero survived. But the realization that this fierce has a legendary power, so to fight him in any way is almost completely hopeless. Gon Leo will not be able to survive after such a fight. That is what they assumed. This shadow's strength lies not only in his powerful attacks, but also in the element. And then the slash marks that slit his arms and came out through his limbs and twisted in the air showed up. But the man realized that physical attack was not at all effective against the shadow, so the trapped guy probably wouldn't succeed. Furious was unrealistically happy that Gon Leo started to act like this, completely unaware of the peculiarities of his ability, continued to call the enemy a stupid brat who cannot do anything good. But then, a hole appeared in his hands, a hole on his wrists, from which a sword abruptly appeared, which began to unfold into several individual blades that flew back at the enemy. They were approaching the enemy. Energy was released from the bottom, and the sharp parts began to open. The enemy had time to react and dodge, leaving a shadow behind him, where the weapon should have hit instead of him. Only the shadow would have been hurt, which would not have affected the guy in any way. But something seems to have gone wrong. The sharp daggers that were the debris of the sword slammed into the shadow, tearing it apart, and that should not and never had happened. Furious didn't realize what happened. He felt pain, sharp and completely unexpected. The picture in front of his eyes blurred and it took a while to come to his senses and realize what was happening. The pile of weapons pierced the guy through, which is what he was trying to avoid. The shadow began to turn back into a cloak and small spasms of pain and tissue damage ran through his limbs. He stood motionless, as if he was stuck to the ground like a marble statue, his gaze slowly sliding over his own body, over the deep, lacerated wounds on his arms and legs left by the swords. Cold and merciless, blood ran down his skin in thin scarlet paths, dripping to the ground, and with each drop of it a strange feeling grew in him, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and confusion. The world around him shaken, his inner voice, usually clear and confident, now sounded confused, almost panicked. How could this have happened? It shouldn't have been possible. He felt a shiver run through his body, not from the pain, but from the realization. And the guy decided to ask a straightforward question about what was even going on. A trickle of blood appeared in the corners of his lips. Through his teeth he asked Gon Leo why he was able to attack a fierce one with shadow power, still with such a level. But what amazed him even more was that his enemy was full of health, and right now he had his recovery working, and even more power began to flow into his hands, which looked like light blue energy, ribbons curling around his wrist, as all of his power, every drop of rage and concentration, gathered in his fist. The air around him seemed to shake, his hand poured with energy, as if the air itself was becoming denser, tauter, heralding something devastating. He slowly clenched his fist, and at that moment his eyes flashed with determination. His opponent may have thought he had already seen everything he was capable of, but he was wrong. He still had many surprises in store, hidden aces, traps and tricks that no one expected. He sarcastically apologized as he put his hand behind his body, apologizing for the fact that his power was unbeatable, and that he should not be mocked as his enemy had been, because he too could retaliate. And he did it, hitting the fist, which had something like knuckles on it, right in the face of the furious one, and in return saying that this guy was tasteless. It was revenge for the mockery of his person. It was a powerful blow, followed by many more of them. It was as if he had grown a few more pairs of hands, with which he diligently fought and taunted his opponent, trying to protect his race and those who were here now. After his face was already swollen, he asked Gon Leo to stop, to wait. It seemed that he had decided to solve everything more peacefully, but the problem was that no one would believe his words, since he had originally come to cause trouble. And the demons who had come along with Gon Leo were in just incredible shock, wondering how his weapon could even do true damage to an ability like Shadow. They watched as Furious's teeth flew out and blood gushed from his nose, while the victim of the beating all pondered on what Gon Leo's techniques were. How was it possible that no one had ever been able to fight back with such an ability? The opponent's abilities were undoubtedly far superior to the S rank. It was felt in his every movement, in every look, full of cold rage. The blonde, despite the obvious difference in strength, acted on instinct, on pure, unbridled anger. He sharply grabbed Furious by the collar of his clothes, squeezing the fabric to the crunch of the seams, and pulled him to himself. Furious did not even have time to react, but you could see on his face, he realized what was about to follow. A new outbreak of violence, even more brutal than the previous one. Gon Leo hovered over him and demanded that he tell him who the boss of this scoundrel was, who had committed a far from honorable act, and sided with those who wanted to unfairly take the first place and enslave the other races. Gon Leo was becoming even angrier than he was at first. He pressed the fierce one, asking how he was able to get into the demon clan, and demanded to reveal the cards, who helped to infiltrate here and organize the coup. And his victim only asked a question at the meeting: does he really think that he will turn over his comrades? And added that this is what the demons themselves do, again humiliating the whole clan, as if he did not realize that once again he was getting into trouble. And after Gon Leo said that he had ways to make his opponent talk, he grabbed his face, his swollen cheeks erupting in another wave of pain. The weapon in his hand began to open the blades harder, and Furious was worried that he couldn't resort to his skill. The blonde man's weapon held him too tightly, and any movement was very painful. So all that remains to do is to fight back, at least with words. So he began to shout aggressively that he would not give Gon Leo the opportunity to interrogate him, and began to threaten that soon the fierce clan will smash all other clans. The demon clan is just an inferior race that is destined to be exterminated. His eyes suddenly burst into flames, burning bright, ominous red like two pieces of red-hot coal, and it seemed that in a moment, sparks would actually fly from them, flying in all directions, burning the air and skin. The demon who was holding him felt it almost immediately. The heat coming from his body became unbearable, as if he was holding not a man but a living flame. With words of promise that the fierce clan would rule the world, it exploded in Gon Leo's hand, bursting with red and black dust. The blonde man didn't even flinch at this departure from the bullying and imminent death. The others watched it all with shock. They didn't realize what was going on and initially had no control over the situation and didn't try much after being taken hostage. And suddenly the shadows retreated, releasing their captives, who did not even realize that they were free and only looked around with open mouths, like children who saw something magical. But one still immediately realized what was going on, and he could feel how confused the fierce one who was holding him was, which meant it was time to act and start interrupting those who were trying to destroy them. So before he could run far away, the demon stabbed him in the stomach, asking him where he was going. He wanted to get revenge on them all for what they had started to do and what they planned to do in the future. The other fighters also rushed to deal with the scum. The situation had changed for the better. The head of the Kana was dead. Now they were dealing with everyone who hid in the shadows and did not act on their own, but only followed orders. The ruler of one of the countries was amazed by what he saw and changed his cool attitude towards Gon Leo. He was saying thank you very much to the guy from Yungo. Now they can win. But the blonde behind his back covered his face with his hand. He did not believe that it was like that, so he began to mutter to himself that no, it's not that simple. It's not over yet. Something much worse and bloodier awaited them. But suddenly he caught a strange phrase in his head, which the second man also paid attention to, so he heard it too. The voice was asking the third brother about what he was seeing. Xie Min's eyes widened at that, and then he realized everything. The daze was replaced by a sudden clarity. It was as if someone had torn the veil from his eyes. He swore under his breath. His heart pounded harder, but not from fear, but from powerlessness. He felt that he wouldn't be able to stop anything. Everything was happening too fast and time was slipping away like sand through his fingers. But what was eating him up the most was the thought that the threat was coming from within. Everything pointed to it. There was a traitor lurking in the demon clan, someone who knew their weaknesses,